That was good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a strange day. 75th anniversary of the National Health Service, something that's so baked into our lived experience in this country that we possibly can't contemplate what it would be like if it wasn't there. It's traditional at this point in my ponderings to remind you of the Joni Mitchell song. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. And it then occurred to me that it's in a sense only 75 years old. So it may feel as if it's part of our social furniture, our shared furniture. It may feel as if it's an intrinsic part of our lives, but it's only 75 years old. I'm always conscious, oddly, of us running out of people who can remember things. So I was really struck when the last First World War veteran passed away, the last person who could tell us what it was actually like to be in the trenches. And of course, in the coming years, we will say goodbye to the last veteran who could tell us what it was like to fight against the Nazis, to fight in the Second World War. You wave goodbye, don't you, to entire generations without noticing it, because we make our private goodbyes, our personal goodbyes to individuals, largely to loved ones, sometimes to public figures, never to whole generations. They sort of slip out of sight, often without us noticing. And it won't be that long. I saw a picture this morning of the first NHS baby, very happy looking woman. And what an amazing thing that is, the first NHS baby. I don't know what our grasp of history is like. And I don't know how much of it is down to the species, down to being human, and how much of it is culturally specific or geographically specific, how much of it is down to being British. You know, I find it almost impossible, for example, to believe that when I was born, it was 27 years after, pretty much, the Second World War had finished. Just 27 years. When I was born, we were considerably closer to the end of the Second World War than we are today, almost twice as far away today from when I was born. And that makes no sense to me, because you didn't grow up really in the shadow of the Second World War. If you were born in the 70s, the early 70s, you had possibly the consciousness of an absent grandparent, and you had the consequences perhaps of your own parents growing up without a parent or having endured privations, but it felt like a different age. You studied it in history. You didn't study it in the rearview mirror, the recent rearview mirror of life. And I don't know why this morning I was struck by similar thoughts about the NHS. I think it's because a lot of people, including, I think, the King's Fund, or certainly some expert observers, are using the centenary as a warning. We are being told that 13 years after patient satisfaction within the NHS was the highest it had ever been, there are now deep concerns that it will not survive until its 100th birthday, 25 years from now. You see what I mean about time? 75 years, wow, it's a big one. We've got another 25 years, during which period many people are warning it may buckle under the weight of pressure caused in part by incompetence and underinvestment. Whether that's deliberate or not is something we discovered at length yesterday. And I think the general consensus was, with a couple of glorious exceptions, the general consensus was that they probably are embarked upon a deliberate programme to turn the NHS, carve up the NHS, privatise the NHS on a scale that we are not even close to at the moment. Tony Blair adds his voice in a way to that call today, suggesting that people who can pay for private treatment they already do jump the queue, but a sort of extension of allowing NHS patients to be treated more quickly. We may have a look at that later in the programme, but I'm just struck by that fear, that warning that it may not survive. And I thought perhaps the best way to do it today, to talk about it today, would be to recognise how wonderful it has been. The problem is, you know, and I don't know that I'll read these ones out today. I would on every other day of our time together. But I'm already getting really unhappy stories of poor experiences, tragic experiences in some cases. And I feel for you, but I don't think that today is the day for those stories. I think today is the day for stories of gratitude. Is there a hospital that you go to even now, years after the experience that caused what I'm about to describe, and even now your tummy turns over? Is there? Is there a hospital that you walk into and you get an almost sense memory, if that's the right phrase, of the time you were there wondering whether a loved one was going to pull through, or the time you were there wondering whether you were going to receive the all clear or the worst imaginable news? You know that tummy flip feeling that comes back sometimes in the most surprising of circumstances. There are a couple of hospitals in London that I see the ghosts of past me in there waiting for news about loved ones. It's crazy to think that is the environment in which these people work every single day. Unless you have profound and recurring illness in your life or in your family, hospitals, the NHS, is something to which we turn in times of trouble. And yet for the people in it, it's their sun and their moon, isn't it? It's their daily experience. It's their life as well as their livelihood. And we know that there is something beyond mere livelihood for most healthcare professionals. We hear it on this programme every time we turn our attention to these issues. We hear, yesterday it was actually people working in the care sector displaying a compassion or an empathy, a sense of vocation that you don't find in all professions, you don't find in all jobs. I don't think you find many bankers who are doing it more for the love of the change they can make than perhaps for the money. And I suppose you'd have to include the average radio presenter in that category as well, although thankfully there's nothing average about this radio presenter. I want to try today to touch those parts, to touch those stories that... So I said to the producer before we came on, I said, we should talk to people who wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the NHS. And she said, quite rightly, although, I mean, a little miserably, she said, well, that's pretty much everyone, isn't it? Because, you'd be giving birth in a bath, or you'd be giving birth in the back of a car or something like that. Yeah, I didn't mean like that. I didn't mean labour. So excluding labour wards or excluding normal, uncomplicated births, you wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the NHS. But I'm also going to break one of my rules. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret, and I don't want you to get cross with me. All right. You know, when I talk about how easy it is, if you're not interested in making an interesting programme every morning, how easy it is to get the phones to ring with uninteresting contributions. And I usually refer at that point to immigration or parking tickets, or these days e-scooters seem to have moved into that space where you sort of think, oh, I tell you what, James, the hardest thing about your job must be making the phones ring. And you say, it really isn't. It's possibly one of the easiest things to do. It's making the phones ring with people that have got interesting things to say that is the challenge to which some of us seek to rise daily. But there is one question. I think it's the legend Clive Bull who pointed this out to me, but I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but apologies to Clive if I've misremembered. You can always make the phones ring off the hook in a radio studio by saying, is there anybody old out there feeling poorly? And it will not necessarily, I told you that you weren't allowed to hate me for revealing this to you. It will not necessarily prompt a cavalcade of scintillating contributors, not necessarily. And I'm tempted by a variation on that question today. And I don't know whether it will work. I don't know how it will work. But I would like to run it alongside the question of what has the NHS ever done for you? And I ask that in the spirit of Monty Python and the Romans, 03456060973. Because I got one text yesterday, and I'm so sorry that I can't remember the name of your uncle. But it was the tale of a 5-year-old boy whose mother didn't have the coins to pay the doctor. And therefore my contributor never met their uncle because their uncle died at the age of 5. Was it Uncle Alex? I think it might have been Uncle Alex. Apologies if I've misremembered. And that one stuck with me yesterday because I thought I have no idea of what that was like. I have no idea. And if you are in a position to tell us a tale of what life was like before the NHS came along, then I would like to apologise for my lazy and unpleasant allusion a moment ago to people of a certain age feeling poorly, and I'd like to welcome you onto the programme today to tell the rest of us what it was like, because if the warnings are correct and we do struggle to see the NHS through to its 100th birthday, I think we're probably in for a fairly horrible shock about what that looks like. The parallels you can make with other countries already are pretty terrifying. The bankruptcies, for example, that you see in America as a consequence of medical bills, even including people who've got forms of medical insurance, are off the charts. This is what happens when a country is slowly baked, and I don't mean that in a good way. When a country is slowly baked, they don't question the way things are. And in America, the idea that you could have a health service in some way similar to ours is routinely derided by right-wing politicians as socialism, even by the more excitable ones as communism. And the funny thing is, it is socialism in a way. It is publicly owned. It does belong to all of us, which is why a certain political ideology hates it so much. They don't think it should belong to all of us. They think it should belong to them, and the rest of us can jolly well pay if we want to access it. The idea that somebody paying a ton of money in tax, if they are in fact doing so, should be subsidising the healthcare of you and your children, sticks in the craw of the people who hold the reins of power and have held the reins of power in this country now for the best part of a decade and a half. And they would love to see it turned into the health equivalent of our water companies. They'd love to see it turned into the health equivalent of our energy companies. They'd love to see it as a sort of supermarket of treatment where the more you pay, the more you get, and the quicker you get it. They'd love that because they'd be fine. It's the rest of us that wouldn't be. And of course, that's the bit they never really tell you. That great success of 20th century politics, and you'll remind me who said this. It's one of two people, isn't it? The idea that the great success of 20th century politics is wealth persuading the people to use their votes to protect the interests and advance the interests of wealth. You think that's a bit too pithy? Just have a little think about it. Have a little look around and ask yourself in whose interests people cast their votes for the current lot in power, or of course for the imposition of economic sanctions on ourselves after 2016. So there we go. 0345 6060 is the number you need. It's the 75th anniversary, so it'd be a slightly different show from usual. The criteria for contributing is very different today. I just want to hear from you. And if it's a story you think you might struggle to tell, rest assured, there's no rush, there's no pressure, and if you change your mind halfway through, that's fine too. So we'll take those calls, and we'll take hopefully a few from people, because you'd have to be well into your 80s, wouldn't you, to remember what it was like before the NHS. So I hope I can tempt you onto the programme today as well, if you can give us a little flavour of what it was like, what actually happened. I remember reading, I think this was America, or it may have been historically here, but I remember reading about badges on houses that revealed whether or not you'd paid your fire insurance. And if your home was on fire, then the fire service, it must have been in America this, would not attend, or it wouldn't, if you hadn't paid your fire insurance, the fire would not be extinguished. And there's a sort of brutal logic to that, a brutal Tory logic to that, but it's kind of terrifying, right? That's socialism, by the way. Everybody pays into a pot, and from it, everybody gets the same out, even though you put different amounts in. That's kind of how taxes work. That's why they hate it so much. The people putting the most in don't think that you should be taking out as much as they can or as much as you do. It's not complicated. It's not even political. It's just counting. But the NHS is the opposite of that as well. Doesn't matter how much tax you pay or how little tax you pay. We are all equal at the point of entry. You can, of course, spend money to skip queues, to go further and faster, but fundamentally, and always, and especially with really serious illnesses, you walk through that door and everybody's equal, which is why some people hate it so much. And it's why we should, if it comes to it, fight tooth and nail to keep it in as close a form to its current setup as we possibly can. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. Your tales, I promise. No more of me after this. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. What, you don't know what... I mean, I'm not going to sing to you, I promise. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. And the saddest element of the NHS's 75th anniversary today is, of course, the warnings from many, many quarters that it may not survive to 100. Helen's in Coventry. Helen, what made you pick up the phone?
Just a deep gratefulness for everything.
I am deeply ungrateful for the quality of your phone line, which we will try to rectify imminently. My apologies. Tony's in Aldershot. Tony, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello,
how
Tony.
are you today?
Very well, mate. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
Excellent.
Right, I'll be as quick as I can. 5 years ago, I nearly lost my son. He is 28 years old now. He fell asleep at the wheel.
Oof.
No fault. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't drink driving. No drugs,
Sure.
nothing.
Yeah. You wouldn't be ringing me if there was, would you?
No. And I got the phone call as a mother that you would not want from a policeman at 2 o'clock in the morning,
God.
saying your son has been in a really bad accident. I then had to drive from Aldershot to Nottingham because he went to the Queen's Medical Hospital up there. And I walked into resus and collapsed because my son had a bleed on the brain, collapsed lung, fractured ribs, a broken back, 2 fractures as well in his back. And they didn't know if first he was going to survive, and if he did survive, if he was going to walk again. He then went in for a 9.5-hour operation on his back.
What happens to you in those situations?
I when I walked in, the nurses are fantastic. They just kind of like mollycoddled me, kind of thing.
Yes.
And also, not luckily, but my son was in the army at the time, so I had army welfare coming out to the hospital to me to sit with me. The people on the high dependency unit when he came out of surgery were just phenomenal. From the people who served the tea, to the nurses, to the surgeon who was, he worked on my son for 9.5. My
Incredible.
son's spine is metal work.
Right.
I feel I cannot thank them enough, from the physios to the nurses to the support workers, because my son, after being in hospital for 5 months, it wasn't a walk, but it was a shuffle. Yeah. He shuffled out of that hospital, and if it hadn't been for them, he wouldn't be here today.
You don't. Sorry, go on.
No. It's just I am blessed that he had these wonderful people look after him.
Well, we all are, aren't we? Really, because
my God,
but for the grace of God.
They've saved my son, a couple of times, and going forward, he had to be medically discharged from the army, and he tried to take his life. And again, at Frimley Park, I can't fault Frimley Park Hospital, and that's the NHS staff. They've saved my son so many times, and I am so thankful. I would do if I won the lottery, and I know loads of people. I would give all of it to the NHS, just so that they can continue. Or I really would do that, because you know what, I am forever in their debt.
And I think if everybody had been through what you've been through, if everybody had been through what you and your son had been through, then the political reality of the National Health Service would probably be very different. I think to have your face, if you like, pushed up against the necessity, the importance, is so powerful. You can tell your story. You moved me enormously. You moved everybody listening. But if unless we experience it ourselves, we're not going to have that visceral response, that emotional heft that you feel that would prompt you if you were to win the lottery. to give it all, to hand it all over, if you could be sure of its destination. And do you know, Tony, I was looking at something before you came on because I just wanted to be clear on this, and you are, in many ways, you teed it up for me quite perfectly. I was just looking at American law firm websites and I stumbled across this. After a car accident, the victim is generally responsible for paying his or her medical bills. This is the case even if it is clear that the other driver was at fault for the crash. However, if the other party or parties is determined to be at fault, the victim can bring a claim against them and or their insurance companies, seeking compensation for medical expenses and other damages. So the question of what it would be like if we didn't have the NHS, if we had some sort of American model, there's the answer. The victim is generally responsible for paying his or her medical bills, hopefully via insurers, but not necessarily. Thank you, Tony. Helen is in Coventry on a better line. Helen, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I just want to say how grateful we are as a family for everything that the NHS has given us. I had 2 ordinary pregnancies and then had to have 2 emergency sunroof deliveries, and was looked after really well by the NHS. And then our third little one, we went into our scanning appointment, and they could see that there was a hole in his heart, like when he was just a strawberry size.
How did they break the news to you, Helen? How did they tell you?
Really wonderfully. So he was diagnosed with Down syndrome, and they saw that there was a heart problem, that he would need an operation when he was born.
Right.
So they looked after us incredibly. We had so much compassion and care and looking after us as a family. And nobody expects to have their life different. You run into the antenatal appointment and you think, is it going to be a boy or a girl? But we were given a medical book instead of the mother care guide to pregnancy. And that was fine because we had the NHS, behind us. And when he was born, he came into the world, given a screening, and was a miracle. We spent months in neonatal. He was a little bit larger than the regular neonatal babies. They had to send out for emergency crib that was a little bit bigger, but he was looked after by an incredible team. We saw him resuscitated on the table after things didn't go quite right. And that was a shocker. We spent a lot of time travelling to Birmingham, to Coventry, and the teams of people that work there. And when we've stayed on the wards, which we've had to because of respiratory problems and breathing issues and choking, there have been just endless. It is a hard, grueling job to be a nurse. I can't imagine. You're perpetually on tap to so many different people. You have to be alert and aware, and the constant buzzing of alarms. But it's that endless source of a person that's there ready to support you as a family. And we've had blue lights into A&E. We've done it all, and there are so many people who have been incredible people, the skills and the work that they put in to make. And
it's all day, every day, isn't it? Because you and Tony both with tales of your children, 2 mums talking about this. It's beyond a blanket that was wrapped around you. It's something that I can't properly articulate. It's everyone and everything that is wrapped around you and your little one at a time like that.
They've given us, they gave us a gift of his life, because he's got a lovely. When he's grown up, we're going to give him a medallion to go with that massive scar that runs down his chest, and he looks really cool. But,
it's like an action hero. Gosh, Helen, thank you. I love the way you said we had to go to Birmingham. I know it wasn't your intention, but in my mind it sounded like that was one of the worst parts of the whole experience. It's a line in Jane Austen about. So he says something, one has no great hopes from Birmingham. There is something direful in the sound. I grew up nearby, so I'm allowed to say that. It's a much, much, much nicer place than it used to be. It's coming up to 10:30 already. Gosh, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 10:33, and as you heard, it's an arresting headline, isn't it? The NHS turns 75 today, but the landmark anniversary has been greeted with dire warnings. It is unlikely to survive until its 100th birthday without drastic change. We spend an awful lot of time talking about possible solutions, syntaxes, possibly cutting back on medical treatment for the dying, for the terminally ill. We hear often about management and bureaucracy. But actually, in terms, if you count, we have Sheila Fogarty's very strong on this. Actually, Sheila will be with you later, of course, as usual. I think Wes Streeting is with her today. Actually, the Shadow Health Secretary. So we don't have a particularly fat management in the NHS compared to other countries. Per medical professional, we have quite a low number. So it's not that. But these are the lazy Tory talking points. I was a little impatient yesterday with a caller talking about how the NHS needs to be more business-minded, because you look at what businesses do in the current climate, and the idea that you want the NHS to be more like a water company or more like a supermarket or more like, well, you pick your favourite example of commercial altruism, maybe a bit more like the John Lewis Partnership. We could live with that. They've got a bunch of problems, but more like a bank. I mean, it's insane when you think about it, isn't it? We need to be more business. So it's a different model, and it needs to be different. But that is, of course, an ideological battle that's been raging for 75 years and beyond. There were plenty of people who didn't want the NHS in the first place, including quite a lot of doctors. I was reading just the other day. And speaking about reading just the other day, there were fire badges in London and in England. It wasn't just an American thing. I think it might still exist in some corners of America, but it certainly was the case in this country that you had a badge on your house denoting whether or not you'd paid your fire insurance. And if you hadn't, and your house caught fire, well, tough. Stuart's in Peterborough. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hi. A bit nervous. It's the first time I've called in.
It's only me.
I just wanted to sort of tell my story of what the NHS did for myself. I mean, how do you follow two mothers with children?
Yes.
But during lockdown, I got diagnosed with bowel cancer. And so it was about November 2020, and it was affecting my life pretty badly. So one of the specialist surgeons at Peterborough had a look, said the first elective surgery they would be able to do would be the February. So he basically got one of his colleagues and himself and got me to go in and admit myself for emergency surgery on the Friday.
Wow.
They did an operation, opened me up, found out that the cancer had spread too far for them to actually do. So they fitted me a temporary stoma.
Because how long were you under the knife? Do you know?
That was the short operation.
Okay.
That was about 3.5 hours, I think, from memory. But I mean, I also had a fistula, which meant that my bowel was leaking into my bladder, which was effectively why I was feeling so ill.
Right. God.
So that was making it bad. So then they referred me to specialists at Addenbrooke's. And I underwent, I was supposed to start with radiotherapy, and they did a scan and found out that the cancer had actually spread to my liver as well. So I ended up having chemotherapy, followed by radiotherapy, followed by a 27-hour operation. So effectively, two teams of surgeons, because at the same time I also had a separate type of cancer on my kidney. So normally they would normally do that from, I believe, from the back. So they would open you up at the back and deal with your kidneys. But as they were opening me up to do what they call I can never get the name proper, a total pelvic extenturation or something.
Don't ask me.
So,
how am I supposed to know? You're the one that had it.
I always get it wrong because they abbreviate
27 hours.
They abbreviate it to TPE, and that's the way I remember it.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, basically 13 hours one day, about 13, 14 hours the following day, with two teams of surgeons, and then in an induced coma for 2 days after that, and then about 12 weeks in hospital. In fact, because they removed most of my bowel, my bladder, my prostate, and part of one of my kidneys. And
Go on, sorry.
My surgery was so bad that I actually featured in the BBC Two documentary.
Did Did you?
Surgeons at the edge of life. So,
wow.
So my story and operation is all available to.
That's
to
incredible,
be seen.
because it was such a remarkable intervention.
Yeah, they only do. I think they told me 8 or 9 of them a year.
And that's,
because
because of the scale of it, and because of the I mean, this is where I haven't got the words. Actually, you said you were embarrassed to come on after 2 months. You shouldn't be, because the story is breathtaking in its scope. But that's where there aren't words. Because how do you describe that? That's not a safety blanket. That's something considerably more profound.
Yeah, and that was during COVID. So almost every time you had to go into the hospital or go for a procedure, I'd have to go for a COVID test to make sure, and had to have the COVID tests and before the big operation. And then after that, I still had more chemotherapy just to make sure they'd gotten all of the cancer in the liver, because that just disappeared with the chemo and the radiotherapy.
Where are we now? How are you doing now?
I'm clear at the minute, but I'm still undergoing tests.
Of course.
So I've got a scan later this month, so I'm kind of on 3 month, 6 month scans, because it was it's coming up for 2 years since the actual operation. But
I mean, I don't even want to imagine how much that would cost in a privatised.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the number of scans. I think I've had a dozen. At least I've had every scan going. I've had ultrasound, MRI, CT, specialist CT. I've got 3 scans coming up in the next 3 months still. So what that would cost, and then of course I'm left with, because I haven't got a bladder, very little bowel. I've got a colostomy and a urostomy.
Sure.
And all of that's
it's all
supplies that I need.
Yeah.
That's all free on the NHS. Yeah. I actually purchased 1 bag of the colostomy bags as a backup in case there's any kind of supply, and some medical spray that you use to remove them, and that was £100.
Sure.
Just for one. The
tiniest tip of this enormous iceberg that you sought to pay for yourself. It doesn't bear thinking about. It really doesn't. And you know, that is not the kind of treatment that you're going to be able to pay a few extra quid for to jump the queue or move ahead. The NHS in its current form is the only way in which you'd receive that sort of treatment on that sort of scale in that sort of context, without then spending the rest of your life in some way, shape or form paying for it. Stuart, it's good to have you. Good to have you on board in every sense of the word. 10:41 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Will's in Winchester. Will, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I hope you're doing well. So basically, I've got a bit of a different take. So I had 2 open heart surgeries when I was a tiny baby, and it was sort of, it was life-threatening at the time, and had the operations, and the NHS saved my life. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But the sort of strange twist in the tale, so to speak, was that as a result of that, I had breathing issues when I was growing up.
Oh, yeah.
And then a doctor, and my dad actually, and another friend of mine, recommended that I play the harmonica. And I said, and sort of just had a go at it. And,
to get your lungs going, to increase your lung capacity.
To help my breathing. And it ended up becoming my career. So in a strange way, the NHS not only saved my life, but provided me with employment.
You're a professional harmonica player?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I toured the world, and playing with, various acts and doing recordings, and I've played on pop records. And
what's your favourite? What's the one that everyone listening will be most impressed by?
Oh, I don't know. Probably the Hillsborough charity single.
Oh, gosh.
Which went to Christmas #1.
It did, didn't it? Gosh. That's actually, wow. I mean, you must have had a gift for it, but it's a gift you never would have discovered if it wasn't for that remarkable sort of...
That's the strange thing. Obviously I play other instruments, but not to the level that, I play the...
And did it work? I mean, does it improve your lung capacity?
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I have to keep fit, and I still have to have another operation.
Right.
At the point, open heart surgery. But so the condition I had, by the way, was pulmonary atresia, which basically means that the blood going around your system cannot be reoxygenated. It was great when I went blue. My parents loved that. Bless them. So it was a bit mad. But obviously, in a strange way, it sort of provided me with my vocation.
I love that. You're right. It was a twist that no one saw coming. How long would it take someone who is largely illiterate musically to nail the harmonica bit from Piano Man?
Oh, now that's a question. Now I would say a few weeks.
Yeah,
just a few weeks with my tuition, obviously, James.
That's something that we could look into. I'd love just to be able to, because not that well. It'd be lovely, wouldn't it? It's such a beautiful bit of harmonica music. Thank you, Will. As you say, that one was somewhat unexpected. Lots of messages coming, and I can only read out a few, obviously, on a day like today. But some of the stories, I promise you, I read them all. I read as many as I can. I can't read them all on a day like today because they zip along so quickly. I'm a 43-year-old bowel cancer patient, stage 4. I do hope the NHS don't give up on people diagnosed terminally ill. It wasn't quite. I must have phrased that wrongly, Victoria. The phrase in the BBC report was that cutting back on medical treatment for the dying. Because you took it to mean that they wouldn't have treated you. I'm sure that isn't the case, especially at your age. 10:45 is the time. 10:48 is the time. I opened the show with a slightly odd contemplation of time and history, and you'll have to download it if you missed it. So not exactly selling it, am I? But looking at demographics now as well, projected population of how. When we talk a lot about an ageing population, imagine a graph where so it goes up to 100%, and in 1971, the population, the percentage of the population that is over 65, would be like the head on a pint of Guinness. Yeah, it would be the white bit, and now as you get to, it's projected as you reach 2071. You're looking at about a quarter of the pint would be the head, and 3/4. That is a brilliant way of explaining this graph, actually, isn't it? So you're going from about 10% to not far off 25% head on a pint of Guinness. So that's why the NHS has some of the problems it currently has. It's why the care sector needs help. And you've got 25 Tory MPs this week trying to stop care home management from hiring staff from overseas. It's great. On the premise that it should be British people going in to do those jobs, who very soon will be over 65. It is some mornings when you try and knit everything together, and I'm a little bit too keen to do that sometimes. A little bit kind of trying to make sense of that and make sense of this and make sense of that. Some days you just stare at it thinking, what the flip is wrong with you people? And Sheila got stuck into that story yesterday that I was too disgusted to bring myself to discuss. Robert Jenrick apparently ordering that murals at a asylum centre for children be painted over. Sort of the tiniest little effort to create a warm and welcoming environment for these terrified, terrorised, traumatised children. And honest Bob Jenrick turns up and tells them to paint over it all. Do you know, I actually felt myself gag a bit then. I don't think that's ever happened to me before on the radio. And they're in charge. 10:51 is the time. Back to the NHS and what it means. What has it ever done for you, to paraphrase Monty Python's approach to the Roman Empire? Chris is in Rotherham. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time call, long time listener. It's a genuine pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to get my brain in gear.
Take your time.
I've got my sister, she lives in America, and I'm 38 years old, and over my lifetime, the NHS has managed to, keep my mother alive for a long time, different ailments she's had, given me a daughter, but I have mental health issues that they've been helping with me for the last 25 years. And the fact that they've gone on that long and they are still persistently doing it, regardless of lack of support or lack of funding or things that get taken away or cuts, they still continually do it.
Yes.
And over the last few years, I know a lot of people who have had different treatments that they've been waiting for that they've not been able to get. And they've complained and said that, because of waiting lists being extended due to COVID or other reasons, even to go so far as to blame foreigners and things like
Always.
that. Yeah. I always find myself on a really tough stool with this. To try and talk to somebody about an ailment that they've got, which they are suffering with, that they can't get treatment quick enough for, but to blame the NHS for at the same time, considering everything that I know that they've done for virtually everyone. Whereas my sister in the States just have routine checkups for things that are normal. Well, not normal, but something that would need to be done after.
Something we'd take for granted. Something we'd take for granted is what you mean. So something unextraordinary or even ordinary.
Yeah, she became quite ill some years ago, and the treatments that she had to have. I'm sorry, I've got to be quite vague because it's not my business to tell, really. But when she became quite ill,
take your time. Be sure you want to say what you want to say.
Okay, she became quite ill, and the treatments that she had to pay for made me think of this in a completely different way.
Yeah.
In that, even just for the checkups, she's looking at $200 to maybe $600 sometimes, just to have these done every year or every 2 years. And to have something really bad happen to her could break the bank, whereas we don't have that issue over here. We kind of go, if something bad happens to us, the worst negative effect of it is something bad's happening. Whereas over there, it's not only that thing, it's is it going to cost the entire family?
Well,
it's going to break the bank.
It's the cause. You say break the bank as a figure of speech. It is literally the cause of more bankruptcies than anything else in America. Literally.
Yeah, and the idea that we could lose that over here is actually quite terrifying to me.
And it should be terrifying. Yeah, it should be terrifying for everybody. But I guess the closer you are to it, the more you appreciate its value. Unless you're in that category you describe, and it's a real category, isn't it? People who are unhappy with the provision they're getting. You can always rely upon a right-wing commentator or columnist to start trying to blame doctors or accusing doctors of being lazy, or all of these things, whether we realise it or not while it's happening. They contribute to the idea that it's their fault things aren't good, rather than the fault of the people with the purse strings, the people in charge, the people pulling the levers of power. And it works. You sit there, your mum can't get an appointment, you're going to get cross with the NHS more than you're going to get cross with the government, I think. More easily with the NHS than the government.
Yeah, I've always found the idea of immigration as an argument about the NHS going under quite funny, because people say immigrants coming over here and getting treated first and things, but often in my experience, immigrants are coming over here and taking the jobs that they very well need within the NHS that support us. So,
well, there it is. And these days, of course, paying a health premium as well. Not the ones that work in the NHS, but an awful lot of other people coming here from overseas paying money up front to access the NHS, regardless of how much tax they go on to pay. Thank you, Chris. You're right. I mean, I was watching that Vote Leave advert the other night, the one actually set in a hospital that was carefully calibrated to land in people's Facebook feeds. And my God, it was disgusting propaganda, utterly at odds with what was feasible and indeed deliverable. But how will we ever know for how many people that worked? This sort of picture of waiting rooms being full of people who look visibly... You can't look visibly foreign, can you? Because that would involve some form of white supremacism. But people who just did obviously contribute to the idea that if we just stopped them coming here, then we'd all get treated immediately. 10:55 is the time. Tom's in Coventry. Tom, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. First time caller like your last caller. So here we go. I mean, we've heard a couple of mums calling in regards to how the NHS have helped their son, but it's actually a son calling in how the NHS helped their mum. When my mum had me a couple of months after she had a seizure, and she actually got told she had epilepsy.
Right.
And I mean, from there she's she's had multiple different kinds of fits, where she's been paralysed, fully aware but paralysed, and some of the most recent ones are what the family call exorcist fits, so short of the old film where the woman's in the bed.
I'm familiar with The Exorcist, and I'm also familiar with family humour and banter. So I think you need to be comfortable with both in order to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, short of her sitting up and turning her head all the way around is basically what she's like when she goes into it. So it's quite volatile.
It's horrible to witness. It can traumatise the people in the room. It's hard enough. It's horrible for your mum, but it can be horrible for the people helping as well.
Exactly. I mean, there's two victims, and there's the person that's actually going through it, and there's the people that have to watch her do what she does. Yes. But I mean, everyone from in the whole 27 years she's been going through it, they've been great. There's been times where she stopped breathing, and she had to be resuscitated, kind of thing. And I mean, all forms of the NHS, from the doctors, the specialists, the nurses, and even the switchboard operators, because I was educated from a very young age by the NHS and family and how to deal with it if Mum had a fit when she was alone with me. So from the age of 5, I was fully aware of what I had to do and who I had to call, and then explain what was going on. And it's just from that, you know, the family in itself has had a lot of aid and help in regards to how to deal with Mum in that situation. So it's just overall it's been
it's part of it's the fabric of your life then. This in a way that other families won't understand or experience.
It's horrible for Mum because she can't be on her own now. You know, she's a fully grown adult and she wants to go off and be independent in a way, but she can't.
Really?
She's, you know, if she's not with a partner, she's got to be at home. And I've obviously grown up now, and I've moved into, you know, my own place and with my partner. But it's difficult because, you know, if the time calls, I've got to stop what I'm doing and head over there if I have to, if she's not very well. But you know, she's also aging now as well, and the fits are having she's bounced back. You know, she used to come out of hospital and be totally fine then. But
as she gets older, they could have a more profound impact, couldn't they? But they're there.
She loses days sometimes.
Oh, God. God, really?
So it's one of those. Yeah, like I remember she was in hospital once and she asked me how my ex-partner was. I was like, Mum, I've not been with her for a while. So
I hope that wasn't Freudian. I hope she wasn't sort of giving away who her favourite was over the years.
Yeah, no, she did tell me at that point. I've never liked her. I was like, okay.
Oh dear, Mum say, can't live with them. Well, Tom, thank you. That was nice. You're right. It was a nice bookend. I usually get those stories the other way around. The concerned mum sharing the tale of how the son or the daughter wouldn't be with us, were it not for the ministrations of the NHS. But a loving boy there, talking really rather beautifully, mate, about his mum. And that idea of you needing, from the age of 5, it's just part of your, you know, my equivalent. It's pathetic. As a son of a journalist, we always had to be able to answer the phone and take a good note. You had to be able to contact the emergency services and provide a detailed medical description of what your poor mum was going through, and it's part of your life, like like CBeebies would have been, or trips to the sweet shop, just completely intrinsic. And that's the point about the NHS, isn't it? It is 3 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to mark the 75th anniversary of the NHS. It is. It's powerful stuff, isn't it? It really is. And trying to pin down precisely what it is that's so important today. The warning that it might be 100, might not get to its 100th birthday is urgent and quite chilling, quite disturbing. But of course, correctness, if you like, the appropriateness of looking more in the rear view mirror today than towards the road ahead. PMQ's coming up a little bit later. I've also got some news about my new book as well, which I'll share with you at some point. I didn't feel it would be appropriate in the first hour of the programme, given the seriousness of what we are discussing, but I've been toiling away, as you know, for a long time now, so the least you can do is support it. Marwa is in Ealing. Marwa, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm slightly nervous and emotional, so bear with me.
I can help with the nerves. The emotions are good. The emotions are good.
No, to be honest, I'm in my late 30s, and the reason I'm alive is because of the NHS. It's in black and white. We're very privileged to have the NHS. I've got a very rare medical condition. It's 1 in a million. It's raised high cholesterol, 10 times the normal amount. So you don't find a lot of people like me. And basically, my mom thought something was wrong with me when I was 3. And we went to Great Ormond Street. And that's how the ball got started and rolling. I was discovered at a very young age. And I've been, if you Google it up, it'll tell you that I shouldn't be alive today.
Wow.
I shouldn't have 2 children. I shouldn't be healthy. I shouldn't be running and exercising and doing all the normal things. But I am doing that. I've had brilliant life, very healthy life, only because of the NHS and the doctors and the nurses that I've seen. Couldn't fault them. The treatments I get are world class. We're a small community, so I've got a lot of people around the world that have the same condition as me, and I'm speaking to them. and they don't know half of the treatments that I get.
Is that right?
I'm very privileged, and we are very privileged to have the NHS. It's very sad to hear people these days not appreciating it, and I understand. I've got my brothers work for the NHS. My dad is a retired doctor who worked for the NHS most of his life. Yeah, so...
I don't know how you stop that. How do you stop people blaming the NHS or the people in it for the diminishment in service that's being caused by politicians?
It's very difficult because as a patient, if you go to A&E and you're waiting 8 or 9 hours, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to be angry at the nurses and the doctors and the staff because you think it's their fault. I go to the hospital every other week, so I'm quite a regular visitor to hospitals, and it's for my treatment. And the treatment I get and the staff, they're working super hard to provide all the care they can give. So when they're striking and they want the pay rises, it's not because they're being, greedy. Yes. It's because they are working really hard and they're not being the shifts are really long. The demands are really long. The patients amount they're seeing during the day, you're going to get frustrated when you're seeing 30 patients instead of 20 because of the backlogs that you have. So we should be thankful. We're very, very, I'm personally very lucky. I'm alive today because of the NHS.
Tell me about the stuff they do outside of medicine, because I know your dad was a doctor, but your parents being sat down when you were 3 and given an indication of what your life was likely to look like, what your life was likely to involve. It's not just while the clock is ticking that the NHS is working, while you're in treatment. No. It's a much more enveloping experience.
I always joke, James, because my treatment is so regular, I go twice a month. And I sit in the hospital for my treatment for about 3 hours. I call it going to family and having a therapy session, not a treatment to clear my blood out of cholesterol, because the emotional support you get from the staff, sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're fed up. They know that. So they sit with you there and they go, well, if you need anything. I'll put it in when I got married many moons ago, my nurse came to my wedding. She became family. She attended my wedding. Yes. She was there when I gave birth to my child. She didn't need to be there. She's not, she's got nothing to do with the maternity ward, but she wanted to be there to make sure the birth goes smooth, healthy. That's not part of her job. Her job was to look after me just during my treatment regarding the high cholesterol, but she wanted to be there during my birth to make sure my baby's okay. Yeah. So this is all stories you don't hear. You just hear
that's
the negative.
Point. That's exactly what I wanted to drive towards. Actually,
so it's really sad that I heard you saying that we might not see its 100th birthday, and that would be devastating. Because I owe my life to that.
I wonder what happens to people like you if it does change, or you have to presume that the really heavyweight stuff would be untouched by private.
I'm hoping so.
But they just keep chipping away, don't they? Like a bacon slicer, right? We'll do this and we'll do that. So, and then you get to the point where those chilling words that I read earlier, I think was it Tony, the first caller, just about what would have happened if her son had his car accident in America, and he'd have had to pay, even if it had been somebody else's fault. You'd go into the legal battles between insurance companies. Thank you, Marwa. I don't know why you were nervous. I'm fairly confident you weren't by the time you got to the end of that call, but you've made all of us emotional. 11:09 is the time. Joshua is in Poole. Joshua, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. So I have a very similar story. So myself and I've got 3 younger brothers. We had this rare genetic condition, so it meant that all 4 of us had to go up to Great Ormond Street to have life-saving treatment. And it sort of, the prognosis was that none of us, if we didn't have the treatment, would go live past our 13th birthday. And it sort of, myself and like so many others wouldn't be alive if we didn't have the NHS. And like the treatment I received was a bone marrow transplant.
Wow.
And so it involved chemotherapy. It involved, for me, intensive steroids and other drugs. And I mean, just looking at looked at it last night, and if I had the treatment in the USA, it would be 800,000. That's just for the transplant. That's not alone the needles, any other extra X-rays or treatments and the medication I would be on for the rest of my life.
And all three of your brothers as well, of course.
And all three. And actually, my youngest brother had two bone marrow transplants. So he wouldn't have been alive. Well, he would have died if he didn't find... I get a bit emotional.
Of course you are.
Yeah, he wouldn't be alive. All of us wouldn't be alive without these amazing donors who signed up to the bone marrow registry.
It's quite a big deal, isn't it, giving bone marrow?
Yeah.
I remember reading about it.
But my pickup was my mum passed the genetic gene down to me, but she was also my lifesaver.
Right.
So she was able to give her immune system to me. So I owe everything to my mum, but I also owe everything to the NHS. And, the stories you hear about privatisation, you don't want to go back to the time before the NHS because it would just be absolutely harrowing and, like you said, it'd be going back to insurance companies and fighting.
And also investment in research. I don't know how that would work as well if it wasn't publicly funded, whether or not some of the techniques you'd have benefited from would even have been discovered. And you've reminded me, Joshua, I know it wasn't your intention, but I failed completely, didn't I, to tempt anybody onto the programme who's old enough to tell us what it was like before the NHS existed. That was actually part of the original plan about an hour ago, but I don't know, maybe that was a little bit too ambitious. And so, your family then, like a few of the families we've spoken to and about today, it's not, your relationship with the NHS isn't like the rest of us who turn to it in times of need. For you, it is a thread through all of your lives. It is a constant and essential thread running through all of your lives.
Oh, definitely. I have very vivid memories. Instead of going after school to play with my friends, we're going to my local hospital to see my brother who was receiving treatment, and it became the norm for my family since I was about 3 years old till I'm still under my local hospital, but thankfully just once every 6 months now.
And that is there it is, just part of the rhythm of your life. The punctuation of your life story is the NHS. Thank you, Joshua. And there'll be a lot of families in those positions, won't there? And then there's everybody else. Those of us who, as I say, think of it as an emergency service as opposed to a constant presence or a friend, or as Marwa mentioned a moment ago, family, actual family. And that's why, I don't know, the political conversation, which I don't think we should be weighing in on too heavily today, but that warning in most of the coverage from health think tanks, proper think tanks that are full of experts looking at things from a point of view of society's benefit, not the weird ones that are secretly funded and looking at things from the point of view of their anonymous wealthy donors. But the health think tanks warning that without some fairly serious change, the 100th birthday, it won't reach its 100th birthday in anything like its current form. Imagine processing that information if you were in the situation that many of our callers today have found themselves in. It's coming up to 11:15. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 11:16 is the time, and on we go. Remarkable, really, to think that every family in the country will have some sort of relationship with the NHS, whether it simply began and ended with your birth, or whether, as with many of our callers, it continues from the cradle to the grave. That was part of the framing of the NHS as well, wasn't it? From the cradle to the grave. I'm getting a few texts. We're victims of our own success once again. People can't get through, I'm being told, on the question of what it was like before we had the NHS. So my apologies for that. I'll try. I don't know. We'll see. I obviously can't complain about lots of people ringing in, but if you could just step aside and let through somebody who's a bit older who can tell us what it was like before the NHS was founded, that would be nice too. Carolyn's in Altrincham. Carolyn, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I started working for the NHS in 1982.
Gosh.
So it's given me a 40-year career, and it's given me lifelong friends. It's given me grey hairs and a nervous twitch, but that's another story. It's given me a pension.
Yes.
A healthy pension, it's okay. And it's also 2 years ago in COVID, I collapsed with a major problem and a fantastic treatment. I got an emergency surgery in the middle of the night and it saved my life.
You
So
can't
I'm all
argue with
for
that.
it.
You can't really argue with that, can you? Both ends of the
No.
telescope.
No, I got my money's worth from the NHS after giving so much time to it.
Well, do you know, I'm glad you rang in, and you didn't need the second bit. I mean, obviously,
No.
I understand why you shared the
I
second bit.
certainly didn't need the second bit, no.
but you didn't need to share, because the power of your contribution would have been considerable anyway, because we hadn't really touched upon the fact that the NHS cuts both ways. It provides career and livelihood and deep senses of vocation to countless
It really did,
thousands
yeah.
upon thousands.
It's been my life, you know.
Yeah.
I haven't always loved it.
Of course.
I've struggled at times, but I've stuck with it. And I wouldn't, if I went back to 1982, I'd make exactly the same choices.
I love it. Yes. And look back with that same sense of satisfaction and vindication almost, isn't it? It's not like a normal job, I don't think. You can't look back.
I don't think it is, but it became so normal that it was just my life really, and it gave me a house, a home, a family, everything.
So that, I mean, overlooked regularly as well, of course, that simple part of the economy, part of society that is built up by having well respected, well regarded, previously well rewarded. You mentioned your pension. I think we all know the state of the actual remuneration package today. It should be one of the bedrocks of society, the staff within the NHS, not just the services that it provides. Thank you, Carolyn. What a lovely call. Chris is in Romford. Chris, what would you like to say?
It's quite a long story, but I'm forever grateful for the NHS for looking after my daughter. She was born in 1987, and at the age of about 2.5, we were told she had cystic fibrosis.
Oh gosh.
That affects all of the body, but the lungs in particular. You have to do physio twice a day.
How did they tell you? Can you remember that? What did they do? They sat you down. How does it work, Chris?
Well, she wasn't right. Okay. She wasn't putting on weight, and she was not thriving. And I kept taking her down to the doctors, and I steamed open my letter that he gave me eventually for the hospital,
right,
saying neurotic mother.
Really?
Yeah.
Happens a lot, that, doesn't it?
We were under the hospital.
Yeah.
It rang bells because on the day we went, she had a bit of a cough.
Okay.
And the registrar who saw her must have rung bells with him that this could be something else. And they did the tests, and yes, she'd got cystic fibrosis, and we'd never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. But my two other daughters were tested, and they're carriers for it as well. So it's a genetic thing, so they have to get tested before they have children. And luckily, none of them have come up with it. My tall Victoria, she was the lucky one who got it. She was okay during her younger years. As she got into senior school, she found it difficult, and she had to sit on the wall on the way up to the school and
have a rest. Things
like that. When she was about 18, things were getting quite bad. She'd got a lot of infections, and there was a lot of lung damage. She was on oxygen, and it was pretty bleak, and they put her on the transplant list. They give you a long talk, and it's a talk that she always used to say a mother shouldn't have to hear, because transplant isn't a cure, but it's a chance of life.
A prolonging, a prolonging.
Yeah. She waited for 4 years, and things were pretty bad. She was at end-of-life care. We had the hospice coming in, and all sorts of things like that you don't really want. We had 8 false alarms, and
meaning you thought you'd got a donor and then it didn't come through. Oh my love!
Because they were such exciting times. You wouldn't believe it, because you think that this is the call that's going to change her life and ours with it. But then you've got the journey back home, and she used to say every time, I feel bad, but there's a family out there that feels even worse than I do.
Oh, of course, yeah. Gosh.
And our hospital was Harefield. Harefield were our saviours. They were amazing all the time. And she got her transplant in 2011. She was 24.
Right.
She had a 9-hour operation, and it was all very fraught. And the next day she had to go back into surgery for another 3 hours because there was a bleed that they found, and she was in intensive care for a few weeks, and she was in hospital for 7 weeks all in all, and I stayed with her the whole time.
Wow.
And they were amazing, everyone. And the nurses, they were friends, and everyone was terrific. Transplant is wonderful, and her lungs were wonderful.
Oh.
And we are forever grateful for that donor. He's a young man of 32.
Right.
We don't know any more than that. But she used to write to them every year to say how well she was doing, how grateful she was for their son's life. But as I say, it's not a cure because she still had liver disease caused through the CF.
Yes.
She had diabetes.
Oh, dear.
And, we went from Great Ormond Street to Brompton, from Brompton to Harefield. We were under Chelsea and Westminster for a liver. And on a routine appointment to see about her liver, they also did an endoscopy and found she'd got an ulcer in her stomach.
Oh.
That ulcer turned out to be cancer. So then we were under the Marsden, and she was under them, and she had to have half of her stomach taken away. But she bounced back from that, and the staff there were amazing, and because of all the drugs she was already on, they had to tailor the treatment that she had, the chemo, etc., to her needs. And they were fantastic until COVID struck. And she'd been in the January, and they'd given her what is an all clear, but you're only all clear until the next scan, which is normally about 3 months. And in the March, she started getting a very puffed up tummy, and she looked 9 months pregnant, even though she was only a size 10, you know, and she took photos and sent emails, and she asked for help from everybody. But because of her lungs, they were didn't want to have her in the hospital because there was cases of it up there.
Okay, I understand.
And eventually they said that they would bring her in to drain her tummy, and that was on her 33rd birthday, on the 5th of May, 20. And she went in and she never came home.
Oh, Chris.
On the 24th of May, she died. But nobody could have done as much as they tried to do for her. And I can honestly say that we were blessed even when she died, because I was allowed to go and stay with her for the final week of her life. So she had me holding her hand, as I had done all the way through. And but the people at that hospital, at Harefield particularly, they are still friends. They still get in touch with me, and I can't put a price on the life that they gave her. I mean, while she was waiting for her transplant call, she did a degree course with the Open University, and she got a first-class honours degree in English literature, even when she was so ill.
Who did she get the brains from, Chris?
Well, not me, that's for sure.
Rubbish.
But, you know, she was...
So that's the gift.
Really,
the gift of life, really. You're talking about, and an
definitely.
extension and a prolonging, and more than you probably dared hope for at some point.
They told me, we got the call in October that was the one, and I'd already been told that she wouldn't last till Christmas. because, she was that poorly. She was on a ventilator of a night. We used to have to do overnight feeding to keep her nutrition up, because with a transplant, you've got to be sick enough to need one, but not too ill that you can't have one.
Yes, of course.
But I can't ever thank the NHS enough, and it just breaks my heart, because I talk to a picture now and I say, I don't even know whether you'd get the type of care that you had now, because things are altering so quickly and so much, and I only hope that, either this government or the next government will try and pull it out of the mire that it's in at the moment.
Well, I
for
don't
the
think...
sake of other people like my girl, because you couldn't pay privately to have all that done.
No, not in a million years.
No.
Can I ask what her name was, Chris?
It was Victoria Tremlett, and we used to call it what she was known as Tor, but she went on GMTV and BBC TV and did talks about transplant, and she really did make the most of the life that she did have after transplant to promote, the transplant.
To get other people to sign up to provide that extra lease of life to someone else's daughter.
Exactly, yes. And I'm ever grateful, even though she's not here now. I know she'd be patting me on the back for phoning you and telling you her story.
Well, I'm patting you on the back as well, Chris.
Thank you very much.
And we honour Victoria's memory.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
It's 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It's 33 minutes after 11, and love to Chris coming in from all corners of the country. I've got Angela Rayner on the show tomorrow. It's just been confirmed. So what she's going to do PMQs in half an hour as a sort of warm-up to get you in the mood for asking her questions yourself. So you can hear how she performs against Oliver Dowden. I wonder whether she'll be picking up on Ben Kentish's little scoop about Oliver Dowden presenting statistics to the House of Commons that were absolutely not the consequence of Treasury analysis. They were the consequence of back-of-an-envelope doodlings by spads at the Treasury, spoon-fed to the Mail, and then regurgitated without much comprehension or scrutiny by Oliver Dowden in the House of Commons. It'd be nice if Kentish's little scoop gets a mention. He's not around today, so we get the pleasure of Lewis Goodall's company to talk us through PMQs. That's always a treat. And then she's here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So, that's a nice bit of synergy for you. And you've actually got the Shadow Health Secretary popping up next with Sheila Fogarty. I can't wait for all the tweets coming in going, Labour Broadcasting Company. LBC stands for Labour Broadcasting. Listen, I would love to get a Tory minister in the studio. Seriously, even just for 2 minutes, I'd absolutely love it. That would be interesting. So, if you know one, tell him, because we'll take what we can get here in the interests of journalism. 11:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's go to Hampstead next. Martin is there. Martin, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm not in Hampstead. I'm actually at Camden Town Tube at the moment.
Well, I'm glad we've cleared that up.
Forgive the noise in the background.
Sure.
I'm an old geezer of 77, and my first experience with the National Health Service was as a little one, and the old tonsils out. It was all the fashion then.
Can you remember it? Did you get an ice cream afterwards? They used to get ice cream.
Ice cream, yes. Used to get ice cream, yes. I remember the ice cream, but nothing else. And then in 1983, I became paralysed. I couldn't walk. I was struck down on the left-hand side.
Gosh.
And was whisked off to hospital in an ambulance. And it was discovered I had a brain abscess. So I had a craniotomy.
Oh, my days.
On the way in the ambulance, I had a wonderful moment where they do all the stuff about trying to keep you awake and compos mentis.
Yes.
Ask you all the questions, the date and all that stuff. And this kind nurse said, asked me all that stuff. And then she said, and what's the name of the Queen's children? And I, being a lifelong Republican, said, And I was terrified because I thought, if I don't know, what will they do with me? However, I scraped through that one.
A trick question almost. Gosh.
So I was whisked off to Central Middlesex.
Right.
I'd gone into Chelsea and Westminster, whisked off to Central Middlesex, where I was given what's called a craniotomy, which they go through your skull. And I was really saved, first of all, by this young Irish intern who he gave me various tests, and it looked like meningitis. But he just had a sense that there was something else going on.
Wow.
So he sent me off for a brain scan, and that saved my life. That was the first thing. Yes, there was no other evidence of it. So that saved my life. And then I was given this craniotomy where they drill through the skull. So I've got 4 little holes in the skull.
Can you feel them?
Yeah.
Sorry, you can take the schoolboy. That was the first thing I thought. I just wanted to feel. Crikey. Wow.
Yes, I have to warn hairdressers. And in the past,
you should pretend they've done it. What have you done?
I've lost my scissors.
Gosh, it is for them. It's matter of fact, but for you, it's sort of
that's right.
Transformative. It is, isn't it?
Yes. So after the operation, I had to learn to walk again.
Oh boy.
Because where the abscess was pressing on the motor coordination for the left-hand side. So I had to go through the whole thing of learning to walk as an adult, which is a completely different experience from learning as a child. Because gravity is the best teacher in the world, and you know that as an adult, but you don't know as a child. So I learned to walk again, and then shortly after that, I had a provoked pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that's provoked often by surgery. Extreme surgery, where you're lying absolutely flat out for a long time.
Yes.
And the clot, which seemed to come from my left leg, hit my left lung, and the lung collapsed.
Good grief.
So I was flat out again, put on a penicillin pump, and then had to learn to walk once again. I got through that because they saved my life. They pumped me with warfarin, which is a rat poison.
Of course, yes.
Yes, they recognised me. And that seemed to do the trick. And all was well at that point, the usual slow recovery and all that.
Sure.
But and then about 11 years ago, I fell downstairs and broke my leg. It was what they call a knock, neck of femur break.
Right.
So got a big nail in the leg and bolted top and bottom. But after that, I had yet another pulmonary embolism provoked again by the surgeon.
You've been through it, haven't you? I think and the same surgeon, was it?
No, different. No,
different surgeon. But they sorted you out.
Yes,
they sorted you out again.
This time it was at the Royal Free.
Okay.
But after the first surgery, I used to with the craniotomy after the brain abscess.
Yes.
I used to wake up every morning and look around and see who'd gone during the night because it was intensive care.
Oh God.
And people would be wheeled out. They'd come and pull the curtains around the beds, and you'd hear a clanking of the tin box, and somebody would be gone in the morning. So I used to wake up every morning and go, wow, I'm still here.
I'm still here. God.
That was literally my first thought.
It doesn't get more visceral than that, does it?
Absolutely.
I'm still here. And you remind us as well, of course, about the experience of the staff, the way they have to deal with death on a daily basis, whereas for most of us thankfully it's a once in a blue moon experience, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, I mean they are amazing, just amazing.
They really are. Martin, you be careful, all right? Watch that escalator. It's lifts at Camden, isn't it?
I will. They're a bit dodgy.
You take care as well. And I mean, that again, a sort of catalogue of interactions, a catalogue of experiences. I wasn't expecting that today. I thought, because I looked at it through the lens of my own experience, I thought it would be the moments. And we've had some moments, of course we have. But actually, it's the people for whom the NHS has been a constant crutch, a constant support, even if whether it, like Martin, is a succession of different conditions, some linked, some not, or whether, like Victoria, Chris's daughter, it's a lifelong relationship with, and Marwa, a lifelong relationship with healthcare, the NHS and the people within it as well. It's 11:41. Alice is in Northwich. Alice, what can you tell us?
Yes, I can remember the time before the NHS.
You're too young. Pull the other one, Alice. You're far too young, honestly.
Oh, it's very kind. I'm not, but it's very kind of you to say that.
What can you remember?
Yes. Well, Well, I remember, first of all, I'm a war baby. So
Right.
I remember first having to go into a private nursing home to have my tonsils out.
Gosh.
And I was 4. I don't know what I'd done wrong, but I got spanked by a nurse. And
Oh,
that's
dear.
all I really remember.
Yeah, well, you would, wouldn't you? You would.
Yes. So then the next thing, sadly, my sister, who was only 2, my beloved sister, who was only 2 years older than me, she was admitted to the same nursing home, but she died. She had a TB gland. They made a mistake with the anaesthetic, and she died.
Oh God!
And then a few years later, just after the NHS had started, I got TB. And but my parents they didn't want me to go into hospital because my sister had died in hospital, and so they managed. My father was a surgeon, I should say,
right.
And so he managed to get a paediatrician to visit me at home. I remember I pulled this man's beard. I didn't like the fact that he got a beard. However, he didn't spank me. He prescribed some horrible medicine, which my mother said it was what Alice had. It was fluorescent green and pink and green. I think it must have been sulfonamide. And she used to say, "This is what Alice had when she went down the rabbit hole." There we go.
That's nice. That's a nice way of getting it down your neck, though, isn't it?
Clever, wasn't it? Yes.
Gosh. Well, do you know what your dad thought about the NHS? Do you have any memories?
Oh, he was committed to it the whole of his life, yes. And, of course, I remember because, of course, we had medic, friends.
Of course.
So I should say what I call the high Tories, they have always been anti the health service. So he had friends who were as committed to the health service as he was, and he had other friends who were not, and they made a pile of money.
Yes.
We visited their house. Their children went to expensive schools. So that's nothing against you, but do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. You can do a little bit of both, I suppose. There's crossover, and you're right. I mean, the resistance to the foundation of the NHS, a bit like the resistance, I see it in the same space as resistance to the Votes for Women movement. I can't quite believe how much resistance there was, Alice, because we live in a world now where it seems like it should always have been there.
Yes, and as far as I know, every single time they have done an analysis, comparative analysis of other health systems around the world, our health system has come out tops. But it can't come out tops. Until now.
Yes.
It can't come out tops when money's going to agencies for nurses and being shoveled into private companies to do other things to make profits for shareholders instead of being ploughed back into the NHS itself.
Well, you say that, but I mean, look how well the water companies are being run. I don't know. I don't think we need to be.
Business for you.
That's business for you, Alice. That's business for you.
No. I mean, there are some excellent. Obviously, there are excellent businesses,
of course
but there's always been greedy capitalism, and I'm afraid it's what we're confronted with again.
Just ring fence some bits of society. That's all. And no one's calling for a communist revolution. Just have a couple of things like clean rivers, water coming out of your tap, a bit of healthcare. It doesn't matter if you have some private provision for people who want to have a fancy television and a prawn sandwich instead of whatever is being served to everybody else. You can pay a bit more for a private room if you want, but ring fence some of it. Ring fence some of it. It's not an anti-capitalist position. It's a pro-human position, I think, Alice.
Absolutely. And don't can the fresh air.
Don't give them ideas. Alice, thank you. I love Northwich. It's lovely to hear from you. 11:45 is the time. It is 11:48 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to stop doing the comedy routine about me not having any production for my Doris Watch feature, because I was just thinking, if you're just tuning in for the first time and you hear me moaning about other shows having bigger budgets and having, getting breakfast allowances and foreign trips and a cast of thousands, entourages like Leonardo DiCaprio's and all of that, you might not realise it was being tongue-in-cheek and you might think I'm a right misery guts sitting here moaning. So no, this is sort of deliberate. Doris Watch. So this is Doris Watch, you see. It's a bit like Woke Watch, but it involves Nadine Dorries. It is now, it's 9th of June, 21:30, take away 9, 21 plus 5. 26 days since Nadine Dorries vowed to resign from the House of Commons with immediate effect, and Nadine Dorries is still an MP. Dorries! Thank you for that. 11:49 is the time. It is getting better, isn't it? The timing, you mean, is getting better. Speaking of timing, I've been waiting all morning to tell you that we've gone live now with my new book that you are possibly aware that I have been working on for the last few weeks. So if you follow me on Twitter at Mr. James OB, you can find all sorts of links and details. I'm also taking it on tour, which sounds quite exciting, doesn't it? I'm going to Bath on the 1st of November, Southampton on the 2nd, Birmingham on the 4th. That's a sort of home fixture. Northampton on the 5th. London on the 7th at the Union Chapel, and I'm in Norwich. Aha! I'm in Norwich on the 8th of November. Do you know, looking at that, I'm wondering how I'm going to get back to London to do the show after some of these gigs. But hey-ho, gigs they are, and gigs they shall be. If you want to come along to any of those, Bath on the 1st of November, Southampton on the 2nd, Birmingham on the 4th, Northampton on the 5th, London on the 7th, and Norwich on the 8th. And the links are available, or you can find all the details at Mr. James OB. So it's out in November 2023, How They Broke Britain by James O'Brien. And you can find all the links to pre-order it on my Twitter account as well. If you are a Conservative politician, particularly if you're quite a senior politician, could you possibly stop crashing the economy, resigning in disgrace, being hounded out of office by your own membership, by your own colleagues? If you could just maybe I say stop resigning and then not resigning. Could you stop doing that as well? Stop getting caught bullying, not looking at anyone, Dominic Raab. Stop. If you could just stop for a bit, please, just stop. Because I'm going to be writing right up until the last minute. It should be around about the end of this month. And it would be very, very, very nice if I didn't have to go back over anything in the hope of just zizzing it up to date prior to publication. So if you are involved in government, please now, just for me, please stop. Because it's like Sisyphus. Was it Sisyphus who pushed the thing up the hill and then when he got to the top it started rolling down again? It is a Sisyphean task. Try saying that without putting your teeth in. It is a Sisyphean task doing this book, How They Broke Britain. 10 chapters. Each, and we'll do other dates as well. I want to get up north as well. Don't worry about that. But there's only so many days in the week. We will be 10 chapters. Each one starts with a character, with one individual from the pageant of public life. So it might be Boris Johnson, or it might be David Cameron, or Rupert Murdoch. So there's 10 chapters, and each one then goes into the contribution they have made to the crackerjack country that we are hopefully temporarily experiencing. And then there may even be a few ideas towards the end about how we might begin to dig ourselves out of this hole. So that's How They Broke Britain. My latest effort, the reason why perhaps I've been a bit touchy in the last... I haven't actually, have I? I should be kinder to myself, I think, sometimes. We should all be kinder to ourselves, especially on a day like today when we're celebrating the National Health Service, because mental equilibrium can, of course, have an impact upon your physical health as well. But if I've seen a little beleaguered or tired, perhaps, I hope I haven't, that is the reason why. And another 2 weeks as well. Before I go away. So thank you for all the kind words that have already come in, and thank you in anticipation of all the kind words that will come in. Lewis Goodall will be with us shortly for PMQs. Before that, back to the NHS and back to Coventry. 3 calls in one day, Blaine, from Coventry. I think that's a record.
How you doing, James?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
NHS, yeah, it's fantastic. My mother started working in the 60s, NHS. It was a whole career as a nurse, fantastic. And then she retired, and obviously she's used the NHS herself, as a patient. Yes. 25 years ago, she had breast cancer. Oof. She fought that. She was a strong woman. And then 2 years ago, the cancer came back into her back. She fought that off, went through the chemo again, got COVID, beat that. This woman will not lie down.
No, clearly.
This woman was, she was my rock and everything, seriously.
Oh, mate.
And then, sorry.
Hey, take your time. Don't apologise. Take your time, Blaine.
And so in there.
Why did she call you Blaine? Where did that name come from?
Well, it was the 60s.
Of course.
Well, actually, it was 70s. I was born in 73, so I'm 50. So
same age as me.
Because my sister's name's Lenka. So
lovely.
I don't know where.
No, there were no rules, were there? Now you could just pick a name you liked. You didn't have to name your boy after his granddad or anything like that.
Yeah, I think because she was Catholic and she wanted to go as far away. Sorry, I know you're Catholic. Sorry.
No, take your time.
She wanted to go as far away as possible she wanted her children basically to choose.
She didn't want to name you after a saint.
Yeah, she wanted us to.
You could be the
make
first
our
Saint
own
Blaine.
minds up about religion.
Yeah, fair enough. I like that. So no sort of preconditions or presumptions from birth.
Because I think personally she had a pretty tough time as a child. So
yeah, a lot of us did. We're gonna. I distracted you cunningly there in order to shield you from your own emotions. I don't know whether you noticed.
It was very good.
It was, wasn't it? So I'm very professional sometimes.
You are professional. I've got to say, a long-time listener. Seriously.
Thank you.
And you have helped me so. You've helped me through. I've got to say this for us. Anything else? You've helped me through so much.
Well, that's a lovely thing.
Just listening to you.
Thank you, mate.
Because me and my mum used to talk about the corrupt government, and she's no longer here.
Yeah, I kind of picked up on that. Call me psychic. Bless you.
So anyway, where was I? So yeah, she got 2 years COVID
all the way,
and then last summer, because she said after that, that's it. I'm not going to go through chemo again because it's knocked me around.
Right.
You know, I'm 77 now. It's just all too much for me. Last August last year, she got terminal cancer. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was terminal. Basically, the cancer was terminal. And it was all the aftercare was fantastic by the NHS. And then she wanted to pass away at home. So in February, they provided a bed, a walking aid, everything, blah, blah, blah. Put a medicine cabinet in.
Really?
Yeah. So it locked medicine cabinet. So whenever the staff had to be called out, they could just come out and all the medicine would be ready for her.
I didn't know that. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And
and just made sure that her final weeks and days were as comfortable as they could possibly be, which she had spent her career doing herself for other people.
Exactly. She'd
There's
always
a symmetry there, Blaine, isn't there?
Exactly. And sadly, she died in February.
I'm sorry for your loss. But it sounds to me, and I don't know whether you're there yet, but it sounds to me as if she could have been in no doubt whatsoever about how much you loved her, and that, in time, will be a great comfort to you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Blaine.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
And there's a vacancy.
Yeah.
Mate, there's never been a Saint Blaine. I'd see that as an opportunity if I were you, mate.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving on. Take care.
Fine word. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I say God bless, even though your mum might not have approved. It's just coming up to 11:58. What a lovely man. What a lovely story. What a lovely bunch of calls, eh? I'm getting gypped now for not taking the book tour north of Northampton. I thought Northampton was quite far north. Apparently not. I will do other dates. They're just the first ones that we've announced. I promise you. My parents are from Yorkshire. I'm hardly what you could call a southerner. Lewis Goodall is here. How many has he missed now, Rishi Sunak?
Well, I mean, he's missed quite a few. He missed, I think, the week before last, and he's missing this week because he's going to the NHS 75th.
I mean, fair enough, is it? We would say, wouldn't we?
Yes, I think perhaps. I mean,
is there cake? You've got to be careful of cake. You know what happened last time?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect they might have moved it if they'd asked him to.
Yes.
Next week is, I think, more fair enough, which is the NATO summit.
So he's not there next week either.
So he's not there next week either. I have to say, by the way, I've just looked something up, Joe. I mean, I hate to correct you. Apparently, there was a Saint Blaine.
Are you joking?
I'm not joking. No, Saint Blaine died in 590. Bishop and confessor in Scotland.
Understand what I was
born on the Isle of Bute.
Well,
his feast day is the 10th of August, so you should celebrate that really.
I will. When I was at school, you had to have a confirmation name, which you could pick yourself,
Yes, right.
and it meant going to the Butler's Lives of the Saints, I think it is. And
Well, you
trying
missed
to
out,
find,
Blaine.
I did miss out, Blaine, but
Poor
we used to
Blaine.
we had one lad went for Mungo. You'd try and find the most obscure, and the monks would go, "You can't call it." And you'd say, "I think you'll find it's in Butler's Lives of the Saints, sir." Anyway, so what do we think Angela Rayner will go in on today?
Well, I think that look, there's going to be a few jokes about the absence of the Prime Minister. Right?
Yes.
I think it's absolutely doubtless. I wouldn't be surprised at all if she does, given it is everyone is talking about the 75th anniversary of the
Yes.
NHS and whether we get to the 100
Yeah.
and so on. I suspect that'll be the sort of bread and butter of it. But look, I mean, on the sort of Prime Minister's absence, which I think is going to, he was asked about it yesterday at the liaison committee. I think, there is a well-established precedent within the House of Commons and sort of loose rule that, of course, the Prime Minister's diary is a full one. There are inevitably be going to do lots of things where the Prime Minister, he just can't shift something on a Wednesday afternoon, if Parliament's on or it's not. And so, you have so many in hand here, you can send your deputy along, just don't make a habit of it. Criticism is that he's making a bit of a habit of it. And of course, it doesn't really matter politically in the sense that most people listening to this or whoever couldn't really care less whether the Prime Minister there is there.
Well, you're not exactly selling it, Lewis.
No, but
it's a weekly feature,
but there's
mate.
two things. That's true. But there's two things. It comes on. I give you a lecture about the Saints. I basically say what we're doing is a total waste of time.
I think he is.
Not going to ask me back.
Holy moly!
But there's two reasons it really matters. Three reasons. Those are people who like to watch Prime Minister's questions. Rightly, it is interesting. It's one. Secondly, there is the principle: the Prime Minister should be making himself available to the House of Commons and be held accountable. And thirdly, he is in a position where, in terms of the politics of it, it might not matter to the public that much, but it's just one of those things that, particularly in kind of the papers and elsewhere, people start to say he doesn't like scrutiny, he's afraid of it. The record, he doesn't want to defend his record.
Quite
he's got
petulant before the committee yesterday with Chris Bryant going in hard, studs up.
A little bit, and in this week where we're 6 months until we find out whether or not he's met his 5, famous pledges, and basically none of them really look very good. Just creates that narrative.
And the backbenchers, fourthly, the backbenchers like a bit of leadership, don't they, on a Wednesday afternoon?
100%. The whole point of Prime Minister's question, one of the big points from an internal matter, from a party principle point of view, whether you're the leader of the opposition or Prime Minister, you're there to rally the troops. Yeah. Let them go away to their constituencies at the back end of the week feeling a little bit better than when they arrived. And quite frankly,
you give Jonathan Gullis an opportunity to sort of bellow meaninglessly from the backbenches, he might stop doing things like announcing absolutely hideous policies in conjunction with 24 of his colleagues.
He might be. He might feel a little bit disenchanted this week. Who knows? Perhaps. But yeah, there is a real morale purpose to PMQs. And if I were the chief whip, I think I'd be saying to the Prime Minister, look, you're expecting your troops to go out to sort of spread the message and say things aren't as bad as perhaps people think, but they can't do that if you're not turning out.
It's just like it'd be nice to throw things at the opposition sometimes and to cheer when you put a good put down or a good. I just need to remind everybody that we will cross live to the House of Commons the moment Sir Keir Starmer gets to his feet. So don't think that either of us. I beg your pardon, Angela Rayner gets to her feet the moment that happens. We won't be cutting anyone off in their prime. Do you think that the little Ben Kentish busted him for essentially lifting what he described as Treasury analysis directly from the Daily Mail last time he was on his feet? I wonder whether Angela Rayner will refer back to that, because it is a correct the record territory, I think.
It is correct the record territory, and I doubt he'll do it, though. I mean, look, I think that Rayner's, we've just got, in fact, I think most of the times, and it speaks to how often Sunak misses it, most of the times that I've sat in this chair opposite you, kind of feel like it has been the Dowden and Rayner show, because it is that frequent. I think there is a thing about Sunak, and you alluded to it just now, about the liaison. If I were a Conservative strategist, I'd be a bit worried about it for a general election campaign. He doesn't particularly like, I don't get this, this is not a man who especially likes being questioned. He finds it, I think, rather irksome.
Yes, and possibly a little bit inappropriate.
Yeah, indeed. And he has this slight tendency sometimes, I think, to sound a little bit as if he thinks he's cleverer than the person he's talking to. Now, that may well be true. He's an intelligent man. But the trick in politics, and most politicians, by the way, often do think that.
Of course.
The trick, of course, is to not let it appear
Don't give it away.
as if you think that. And I think sometimes, under the harsh spotlight, the glare of a general election campaign, a short campaign, where whether he likes it or not, he's going to be in front of a camera every
the time.
single day, every single hour,
Yeah.
being asked from the most sort of junior reporter on the smallest local paper right up to the big political editors of all the nationals and broadcast stations
Yeah.
and whatever. And I
Won't be here.
worry he might melt a little
He'll
bit.
be in the building, but he
He'll
won't.
be
I
in
don't
the
think it'll be not between 10 and 1 on weekdays.
I'm sure not.
Although Angela Rayner is here at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Speaking of short, you mentioned a short election campaign. If I were advising Angela Rayner after her last encounter with Oliver Dowden, where I felt he possibly had the upper hand, although it was a fairly grim exchange all round, my advice to her today would be short, sharp questions.
Yeah.
Actually, not the sort of slightly more meandering. There's a time and a place for those, but to try and hit him with a question.
Is she not consulting you for advice?
Not yet, no.
That's
not
shocking.
Yet. I thought so too.
Yeah.
I'm never going to get into the House of Lords if they don't start soon with this.
Arise, Lord O'Brien. Baron O'Brien of
Do you
Ampleforth.
imagine who you might bump into there, eh? You have to be very, very careful.
You're not going to be very popular in the House of Commons, House of Lords canteen, eh?
Imminently, she will be here. We haven't put much flesh on the bone, so NHS, it would be weird if she didn't. She was a care worker herself, of course,
Yes,
and she could refer to... I mean, she could
NHS
embarrass him with this breakout group of new Conservatives, because that undermines his leadership in some ways.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll mention that.
Yes.
Look, Dowden, they will doubtless say, just talk about the long-term workforce recruitment plan, just talk about it, saying we're the only ones, Labour government didn't do it for 13 years, etc., etc., etc. But as you say, I mean, Rayner is this unusual... All of her political opponents find it a little bit difficult to deal with her because she's one of those few politicians who can speak from genuine lived experience.
She's utterly authentic.
She's utterly authentic, which chimes with the kind of zeitgeist of our age, but also is just very, very difficult for her opponents. So, this idea of putting the deputies up every week is not necessarily a great one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself and thank you for your opening comments regarding our NHS, and thank all of those staff that have worked and continue to work in our NHS today. And I'm sure members across the whole House will join me in paying tribute to Lord Bob Kerslake, a decent and kind man who accomplished so much in both local and national government during a lifetime of public service. Our heartfelt condolences go to his family. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see the right honourable gentleman here today. I think I'm right in saying that I have the pleasure again next week, 2 weeks on the trot. They really have given up. Every day, 4,000 families' mortgages deals expire, 100,000 more since we last met, and millions more next year. Families are sick with worry about the cost of the Tory mortgage bombshell. Do they still claim to be the party of home ownership?
Good luck with that. Well, may I begin by associating myself with the Right Honourable Lady's remarks about Lord Bob Kerslake. I knew him from my time in Downing Street. He was a stalwart public servant, and he will be missed by many on both sides of this House. It may come as a surprise to the Right Honourable Lady, but actually some leaders trust their deputies to stand in for them. And when it comes to mortgage rates, I support the independence of the Bank of England taking the necessary measures to control inflation. Just ask the IMF about what we have done in support of them. They've said we have taken decisive and responsible action to bring down inflation, and we will continue to do so. But what's Labour's plan? To borrow £28 billion a year, pushing up inflation. To cut our domestic energy supply, pushing up inflation, and to penalise workers saving into their pensions, pushing up inflation. There we have it from Labour: endless borrowing and higher prices.
Angela Rayner. Mr. Speaker, we've had 13 years of Conservative failures, and that homeowners watching that pathetic answer will be cringing that they aren't celebrating the government's success. They're counting the cost of their failures, and the only thing that's not soaring in prices at the moment is his gags that are getting cheaper by the minute. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just homeowners that are suffering. Security of renters have been ripped away too, with higher mortgage costs handed directly to them. Given most renters live in homes with buy-to-let mortgage, can he tell us Are buy-to-let properties included in their mortgage support package, yes or no?
Definitely. Well, it's actually the case that under this government, and thanks to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, that we have introduced legislation for the first time to support renters, to give them greater security of tenure, and of course the Chancellor will take all necessary measures to stand behind both mortgage holders and of course take necessary measures for renters. But look, we have a choice in this country, and the choice that we have made is to invest in our economy, giving us the fastest growing economy in the G7 for the past 2 years, creating jobs with record low unemployment and increasing people's wages by providing the national living wage, £1,600 into everyone's pockets. That's how this government is supporting people.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Deputy Prime Minister isn't very good on facts, but their party did crash the economy. And he will know that according to his own government's data, over 2 million buy-to-let properties are missing out on support. No-fault evictions are up by 116% this year. So will he tell us if the Prime Minister has a spine now to stand up to the vested interests in his own party and finally deliver their promise to ban no-fault evictions?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister is going to take any lectures on weakness from the party opposite. I remember that there's a lot of talk about reshuffle in the air from the Labour Party. The last time the leader of the Labour Party tried to sack the Right Honourable Lady, she walked out with a promotion. But we will continue to stand behind renters and to support them, and my right honourable friend will take all necessary steps.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, that answer is pathetic for all those people that are facing homelessness on his watch. We will ban no-fault evictions, Mr. Speaker, unlike the party opposite. And Jessica and her 4 children from Plymouth were evicted from their home in April. They're temporarily living with Jessica's mother in a cramped house where her 2 eldest children are sleeping on blow-up beds in the front room surrounded by their belongings. Hardly the decent, secure life that his government promised. Don't families like Jessica deserve better?
Yes. Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what we're doing for families like Jessica's. We are increasing the national living wage. It was this party that introduced the national living wage, not the party opposite. It is this party that has doubled the personal allowance, cutting taxes for those people, and it is this party that has lifted 1 million people out of unemployment. I'm immensely proud of the record of this government, and that's why people will not trust the party opposite to crash the economy again.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I asked a question about no-fault evictions. I was very clear on what the Labour Party would do, but I can't see us getting through a single one of these encounters without the Deputy Prime Minister blaming the opposition for his government's own record. When asked yesterday about the record low number of council houses being built, the Housing Minister said she didn't recognise that statistic. When asked about support for people in temporary accommodation, she said it wasn't her brief, the brief of the Housing Minister. So if council housing isn't her responsibility, whose is it?
Well, the party opposite may have failed to notice it's actually under this government that more council houses were built than when they were in office. It's actually under this party that we have record levels of housing being built. We stand very proudly on the record of this government, but look at what we have done more broadly. Inflation and waiting lists coming down, growth forecasts up, Albanian crossings down. Well, we're delivering on our priorities. What have we seen from the party opposite? They've U-turned 5 times in the last month already. The record is clear. The only thing you can rely on the party opposite to deliver is broken promises.
Mr. Speaker, talking about broken promises, house building is set to collapse to its lowest level since the war. Rents and mortgages are soaring, home ownership is plummeting, and over 1 million people are trapped waiting for a council house. There is one simple solution to this problem, and everyone knows it. So when will he finally stand up for the national interest instead of their own interests and build more houses?
Prime Minister.
I say to the Right Honourable Lady, she may not have listened to the answer I gave and just moved straight on to the next pre-scripted question. We have built more houses under this government than the party opposite. And I'm afraid it's the same old thing from her. She stacks up the endless job titles, she takes the union cash, and she constantly talks Britain down. That's why we will do everything we can to keep Labour out of people's pockets, out of their lives, and out of government.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I might respectfully say to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, if she wants to know what we're doing on rental reform, she can look at the rental reform bill that this government is introducing. But on a
Is that your question? Well, I think you ought to ask your question.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is about the Slapton line in my constituency. Can it be right that Natural England is holding back major infrastructure development in South Devon and not allowing us to keep key infrastructure being developed?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to speak up for the Slapton line. It's one of the most beautiful roads in the country. I understand that the Slapton line partnership, which includes Natural England and the Environment Agency, are working closely with the local community on their plans.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to begin by thanking all of the staff in our health services across these aisles. And as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the health services in the UK, I want to reflect on two quotes from two people. The first one is, it's about using the private sector more, something we should be very comfortable with. The second quote is, people go as NHS patients to the private sector and we could do more of it. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister which quote is from the PM and which is from the Leader of the Opposition?
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I actually just begin by saying genuinely how sorry I was to hear that the Honourable Lady will be standing down at the next election. She and I joined this House at the same time, and I know she has contributed much to her party and to this place. And may I also say, I'm sure she will wish to join me in celebrating His Majesty King Charles receiving the Scottish regalia, I think pretty much as we speak. There's always time for a Damascus conversion, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to the NHS, I will take absolutely no lectures from either party on it. It has been there for me. I was born in an NHS hospital. My children were born in an NHS hospital. It's been there for me and my family, and this government has put record funding into it.
Murray Black.
The Deputy Prime Minister, I thank him for his kind words, and we did join this place at the same time, and I'm pretty sure we'll be leaving at the same time. One problem that faces the health service across these aisles is workforce. And research shows that Brexit has worsened the UK's shortage of doctors. Yeah. European nurses registering to work in the UK fell by 90% after the Brexit referendum. Wow. What more will it take for both him and the Labour Party to admit the damage that Brexit is causing our health services?
Well, it all started off so nicely, Mr. Speaker. But I don't know whether the Honourable Lady has actually been listening to what the government has announced this week. We announced an additional £2.4 billion for our groundbreaking NHS workforce plan. That is the first time in the NHS's history that has happened. And if you look at the record since this party came to power, almost 40,000 more doctors and more than 50,000 more nurses. Once again, the Conservative Party delivering for the NHS.
Sir Edmund Lee. Tonight, at West Lindsey's planning meeting, the RAF will apply for listed building consent to move the grave of Wing Commander Guy Gibson's
step out now from PMQs. We will, of course, keep a very close ear on, or even an eye on proceedings there, lest we miss anything of grave national import. And then we shall return shortly with Lewis Goodall to discuss what we have just heard. The time now is 19 minutes after 12. It's 21 minutes after 12. She took my advice, didn't she? They kept it quite punchy.
Yeah. She's probably listening.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Got a little earpiece in.
Yeah.
She's got a bit of history with AirPods. Start with Mari Blackzinger. That was one of the best put-downs in a long, long time. And before we get stuck into PMQs, she's standing down because she finds it so toxic. She's resigning as an MP, Mari Black, despite being, I think, the youngest ever MP, was she, when she came into...
Yeah, she was baby of the house. She came on the Newsagents podcast, I should say, yesterday to announce it. Little plug there.
Of course she did.
No, that's cool. All right.
Well,
I'm here to fill the back.
I refer people to that. So I encourage people to listen to your
I know you do. I know.
You've been turning them off mine since you got here.
No, she did. It was a bit of a surprise.
Yes.
In the sense, as you say, James, she when she came in 2015, as she alluded to there, or was Dowden alluded to.
Yeah.
She was considered she was going to be the sort of star of the intake. She made this extraordinary maiden speech. And I think it's been known for some time, listening to her when she's spoken about it, that she was pretty disenchanted with Parliament, with the way that it works. She was saying yesterday that she just finds it, so basically so much a waste of her time very often, and that she finds a lot of the atmosphere toxic, that it's a kind of unreformed institution, that doesn't get much done as an institution, it's stuck in the past, it's arcane, and so on. Obviously, as well, others would point out, she does have... a majority to defend in Paisley, and although her majority is very sizable at the moment, with the current state of the polls in Scotland, Labour advancing, amazing. We would have absolutely balked at that race just at the start of the year. The turnaround has been extraordinary. Labour now suddenly breathing down the SNP's neck, potentially, and for every point that they take off that lead, they gain another couple of seats right across the central belt. So really back in contention. She may not have fancied that, who knows, but I think we should probably take it at face value that she never particularly enjoyed Parliament as an institution, but of a hell of a zinger there. Probably the parliamentary burn of the year from her there. So we're saying they're probably going to be leaving at the same time.
She did accept the deputy leadership of the Westminster Party in 7 months ago. So
not long ago.
Probably wasn't planning on walking the plank at that point.
Probably not. But obviously, a lot has happened in SNP politics since then. And obviously, look, we're seeing it across the House of Commons, aren't we? This is exactly the sort of stage of the Parliament now, 12, 16, 18 months ago or so, where MPs have got to make a decision. They've got to tell their associations, they've got to tell their constituency parties whether they're going to stand or not again. And you're seeing, particularly on the Conservative side, but not just exclusively on the Conservative side, just MPs of all intakes to saying that they've had enough. You don't have to go back that far, James, to see MPs, staying 20, 30, 40 years in the Conference. Look, Ken Clarke.
Well, Edward Lee was on his feet then, just when we...
That's true. Edward Lee's been there for a long time, but he's unusual. He's unusual now. Corbyn's been there a long time, Harman, but she's stepping down. It's unusual, getting those sort of Ken Clarke type figures who, he was there from 1970 to 2019. I think the sort of speed of politics has accelerated so much. The sort of half-life of politicians has sort of reduced and reduced and reduced, maybe because of the intensity of the job. It's become a less appealing job in a lot of ways.
Yes, and she was very outspoken in her conversation with you.
And she was very young with Emily. Yeah, she was very, very young when she was elected as well, I suppose. So, she's obviously thinking, there's a whole different life ahead of her.
I'm struck by, we'll have this conversation another time, actually, but what she says about the way Westminster works, because it is a weird place.
Very weird.
Some people get seduced by it and think that they become masters of the universe. It's a bit like Hogwarts. And
Hogwarts gone wrong.
Yes, and yet others, like Mari Black, possibly because she was so young when she arrived there, sort of see through the pomp and pageantry and possibly see something rather dark at the heart of it all. But I don't know. I like it when people have clearly caught PMQs for one of the first times and they text their responses into the programme because it's always raucous and childish. But when you're hearing it for perhaps the first time, it is striking how many people get in touch every Wednesday to say, is it like this every week? They're just like a bunch of children. It's like someone stuck a microphone in my child's kindergarten. And this from, actually unsigned, hilarious, James. The deputy PM gets asked a question he doesn't answer, then complains that the person asking the question didn't listen to his answer, which he didn't answer. By the way, did you mention Chris Bryant and last week's blinder? I did, yes, but it didn't come up. So she went in on housing, which obviously Labour are calculating is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the election looms ever closer.
Yeah, and the coalition for whom that political message appeals is vast in the sense that, yes, there are renters, which are perhaps more natural Labour territory, but increasingly as well, anyone with a mortgage are, looking at what's going on with their bills each and every month or every time they remortgage, whatever, quarterly or every couple of years, and they're thinking, my word, what has happened there? And of course, it is when that happens to the pocket, that people suddenly tune into politics, and perhaps they haven't been tuned in particularly closely before, and they think, what is the result of this? But just to go back to and where's this come from? But to go back to answer what that person was saying in a way, look, if it ever really were a genuine attempt to hold the executive and the Prime Minister to account, it was a long time ago.
Was it? Would you say?
Probably not.
No.
Maybe. Look, it's always been about theatre. It's always been. But then again, we should say there are times, and even in our very recent history, when you can when there is a matter of great import, and the Prime Minister can be pinned down.
Yes.
So, for example, the Boris Johnson Partygate affair. Ultimately, it wasn't what he said to the public which brought him down, or which has led to his being expelled from the Commons, effectively.
Well, he ran away.
He ran away, but he would have been.
Would be
indeed. It was what he said to the Commons. So there are usually at Prime Minister's questions. So
and that was the pincer. That was when Starmer said that. Just leave that there.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are moments when it really does matter. But 95% of the time, somewhere north of 95% of the time, it's mainly theatre. And in a way, that is why Sunak not turning up repeatedly is a mistake. Because if the sort of parliamentary function of it, which is important but is often unfulfilled, is sort of second order, it doesn't really happen, then the main order of priority is to provide a little bit of theatre, get your message out there, as you say, James, and say to the troops, don't worry, I'm in charge, we're going through a sticky patch, but we'll come out of it the other side. Not turning up is just on repeatedly is not a good idea.
Yeah, and also it's indefensible, by which I mean allies can't really...
Not really. No.
Cover for him. They'll say, no. Well, you don't understand. He's got important stuff. But they'd be like, he could have gone. He should have been there.
He could have. The NHS thing, he could have moved. Yeah. Easily. Next week's a bit difficult.
Of course.
Yeah.
There was a time when we could have demanded NATO move.
Yes. We can't even get our own Secretary General these days. So
things ain't what they used to be, are they? So I mean, a bit of a score draw, really, that, or a no score draw. I think Dowden got rinsed by Mari Black, but I don't think Rayner landed any particularly stinging punches.
No, and Dowden,
groundwork, isn't it?
Dowden didn't have a bad line himself, talking about the sort of tensions between Starmer and Rayner.
Is that true? Are they very?
I think there have been differences over the time when they've been there. I don't think that they are. Look, I think that there is inevitably with any professional relationship there are ups and downs, and it's true to say that at one point he tried to move her, and then that didn't work very well when he was at very, very low ebb. I think they recognise that they both have qualities and characteristics that maybe the other doesn't, and in some senses they're quite complementary. But yeah, look, I think that should they get into government, one of the very interesting subtexts of that government will be the relationship between Rayner and Starmer. Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that there is some paranoia at the top of the Labour Party. There always is with any leadership in any sort of leader's office. You
mean with regard to a coup attempt?
Well, yeah, or just around the people who are around. And they're thinking, obviously now, I mean, Starmer's in this interesting position now, and Dowden did refer to this idea of a reshuffle, which there are lots of speculation about Starmer doing a reshuffle, not least because actually the government have abolished and reformed and formed again so many different departments that actually the shadows often don't really correspond to the ministerial jobs that they're supposed to be shadowing. Yes. They've got a DFID secretary, an international development secretary at the moment, for example, and there is no international development department. So there is a suggestion that Starmer will do one last reshuffle before the election to try and get his team in place. But that obviously creates all sorts of internal dynamic tensions within the Labour front bench, because they're all thinking, where am I going to get moved to, whatever. But Starmer is in this unusual period where, they think, daring to hope that they're heading for government, and they're putting the sort of final team in place to go into that general election, which is obviously going to be so vital. And of course, that creates all sorts of tension and difficulty within the front bench.
And, reshuffle on the other front bench as well, surely, before a general...
Oh, yes, I'm sure there will be. Yeah, possibly. I suspect, absolutely. And I suspect in the autumn. And in some sense, Islam will probably wait for that, so he can just see then what departments he's got to play with and who's going to go up against whom. But yes, there will be. And again, it'll be one of those things that we are a great deal of attention paid to it in Westminster. But I mean, in terms of making any fundamental difference to any outcome, is in terms of the election, will be absolutely negligible. I mean, Sunak knows. I mean, this is one of the sort of tensions for Sunak now, which is Sunak's whole shtick is that he's a guy who can deliver. Now, leaving aside whether or not that's true and whether he's proving that, he also knows that basically we are now heading into the time where the capacity for this government to deliver anything other than crisis management is very, very limited, because there is, 12, well, it's much less than 12 months even of legislative time if you take all of the time that the House of Commons is going to sit between now and the election. So the chance, there's not going to be any great NHS reform, there's not going to be any great schools reform, there's not going to be any of that. It's all sort of crisis management and political optics. And then the question is, how good is Sunak at political optics? And the worry among a lot of Conservative MPs is he's not very...
It seems to get worse every week. And that's quite the fall from perceived grace, isn't it?
He seems irritated at the moment that the government... And
it doesn't look like he wants to be there, Lewis.
Well,
as of about 2 weeks ago, I think he's... I mean, it may come back, and I may be misreading it, but he has the air, particularly as you mentioned earlier when he's being questioned, he has an air of a man who's going, oh, why did I do this?
I think he's irritated. He believes the government should be getting more credit than it should. But
right.
I mean...
For what?
Well, in terms of compared to when he came in, that the situation is much improved in his view. Now, obviously, in a sense, that is like a very low bar, right? But also, secondly, even if let's take it just for the sake of argument, say he's right that things are much improved. Governments don't get credit for that.
No.
You can't say, and to some extent, I think that might reflect, again, when we're talking about how quick political careers are now. He only came in himself in 2015. When Mary Black did and when Oliver Dowden did, and he's Prime Minister.
It's incredible.
He hasn't got the kind of hard yards of kind of seeing things go up and down and oscillating.
Yeah, it's a philosophical
and just being like, well, listen.
perspective.
And so if he genuinely is, if the reports and whispers are right that he is irritated by the government getting a lot of credit. I mean, it sounds a bit patronising. I don't mean it that way, but that would advert to a certain level of political immaturity in a way. Like,
naivety.
Governments don't get credit for stuff like that, for just making things a bit better and a bit more stable. It's 13 to 14 years in. The economy is in a terrible state. People are suffering. You ain't going to get much gratitude.
What do you want? A biscuit? Lewis Goodall, many thanks. What have you got on newsagents later, in a sentence?
We're at Israel and Palestine.
Crikey. Good luck. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. After the news, going to speak to a former MI6 intelligence officer about some of the fresh questions facing Boris Johnson about that party at that villa. You remember, with the KGB fella? Lottie Morley has the headlines. It's 12:37. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It was a bit weird last week, wasn't it, for some sort of Johnson watchers? I should probably rephrase that, actually, shouldn't I? But the return of the spotlight, thanks to the Channel 4 documentary, to that visit that Johnson made, having somehow done away with the attentions of his own security staff, the visit that he made to the palazzo of a former KGB officer on his way back from a NATO summit on the attempted murder, of course, of a Russian dissident in this country, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter, and for want of a better phrase, the successful murder of a completely unconnected and entirely innocent civilian, Dawn Sturgis, whose name I always try to introduce into the conversation when we're discussing the Salisbury poisonings. Matthew Dunn is a former MI6 intelligence officer turned author who contributed to that Channel 4 documentary and who's kindly agreed. You'd be familiar perhaps with his Ben Syne series of espionage novels, putting some of his experience to fictional use. But he's very kindly agreed to sort of fill in some of the blanks on the bigger picture. I don't expect you to speak directly to the case of Johnson and that party in Umbria, but I mean, just some of the phrases that we used there, Matthew. A British Prime Minister on his way back from a NATO meeting, presumably in possession of information or documentation that had thrown up there, that had popped up there, and then turning up at a party of that nature without his own security people. How does someone with your record respond when you hear first reports of stories like that?
Well, my opinion and my professional judgment is the whole thing is most bizarre and very, very worrying.
Why?
Well, firstly, the obvious point, this is the most senior politician, or certainly number two at the time of the Umbria event, who has access to top secrets, and he is, reportedly ignoring security and intelligence advice, which is quite clear, and that is, don't do this.
Tell us a bit about the background, because everybody listening will be familiar with what went on during the Cold War and the assignations and the umbrellas with disguised daggers in them. But would it be naive to think that the Russian security services were not as active in this country as they were in the sort of pre-Glasnost days?
Russian intelligence services have always been extremely active in the United Kingdom, Europe in general, of course, but that was prevalent throughout the Cold War and has been very prevalent after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's business as usual as far as the Russians in various guises are concerned. And certainly my experience operating in MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service, was that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, if anything, Russia had become more active.
What are their tactics these days? Because they're not going to be looking for and I'm not suggesting for a minute that they recruited Boris Johnson. I'm just interested in the bigger picture. They won't be looking for ideological recruits, I don't imagine, like trawling through Oxford and Cambridge colleges looking for people who are sympathetic to the Soviet project or the post-Soviet project. But would they still be casting their net in those sort of environments?
Yeah, I mean, it's different motivators in play for sure. So, as you say, no longer ideology, but other factors, including political aspirations or money or whatever. But that casting of the net, as you describe it, is still very much taking place. It's just they're getting their hooks into people for different reasons. So the likes of Oxbridge will still be targeted, but so will other universities, for example, LSE, UCL, St Andrews, the list goes on.
Of course. And what are they looking for, do you think?
Well, they're looking for the same things that I would look for in people, and that is they will be looking at people's lifestyle, their character, what people they know, and what their aspirations are. Ultimately, access to secrets, if not now, at some point in the future.
And if your phone rang when you were in the service and somebody said to you, we've got the Foreign Secretary visiting a KGB spy on home turf, on the KGB spy's home turf, and how did you get rid of he's got rid of his police protection? What would your immediate reaction have been?
One of horror, to
really?
Be frank with you. Yeah.
Were you surprised at how casually it was reported then? Because some people had a proper fit of the vapours. You, as you say, would be utterly horrified by this, but such was Johnson's status in the country at the time in that Brexit period as well, when he was tilting at Theresa May's windmill. It was all a little bit of, oh, good old Boris is up to stuff again, whereas you used the word horrified.
Yeah, okay, we're straying into my opinion really on the Boris situation, but and of course within that, there's always the sense of, oh, that's just Boris being Boris.
Yes.
But we're dealing with national security here. And to dismiss police detail, police officers will accompany foreign secretaries, prime ministers, other senior ministers at all times. That is very unusual to go unaccompanied to a villa that is, clearly almost certainly going to be bugged and video recorded by the owner, etc. This is very, very dangerous territory, and that, as has been reported in the Channel 4 program last week, that obviously came to the attention of the British security and intelligence services, who were very direct with their advice, which was don't do this.
Don't do this, but did it anyway. Do you think this story may have another chapter to be written?
I think most certainly it does. And my view on this, and almost certainly the view of others, will be How can we ensure this does not happen again? To put this in context, when I was in MI6, my ultimate boss was the Foreign Secretary, who at the time of the Umbria situation, that was Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Now, if that person is ignoring security intelligence advice and taking unnecessary risks, where does that leave people like me, people operating in the field, who are paranoid about security and what happens to our intelligence when it comes back to the United Kingdom? It's a very, very dangerous situation.
Yes, it is. I've been plugging my own book all morning, Matthew, so it's only fair that I give you the opportunity to do the same. Are you working on anything at the moment? Have you got anything in the pipeline?
I'm working on my 15th novel. I have 2 series already out. The first being the Spycatcher series, the second being Benstein's series, as you referenced. So 15th novel, which is close to completion.
Do you have to show it to your previous bosses to make sure that you're not giving away any trade secrets?
I do, and thankfully they are fully supportive. And when I started out as a writer, I did expect some objections, but to the contrary, they said, no, this is creative, it's fiction, so we don't have a problem. And after all, the only people who've gone before you are John le Carré and Graham Greene, so good luck.
That's not a bad pedigree. Matthew Dunn, thank you very much for your time. And as he mentioned, I think the most recent book was The Spy Thief, but there is a 15th on the way. 12:45 is the time. Speaking of authors and the NHS, wow, look at that. That's like we planned it. Speaking of authors and the NHS, the most successful author writing about the NHS in history will be joining us after this. I speak, of course, of Adam Kay, raconteur, bon viveur, auteur, and former doctor. It's 12:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I swear this guy haunts me. I announced the publication of my latest book earlier on the programme, and Adam Kay, who last time I had a book in the top 10 was selling approximately 50 times more books than me every single day and every single week, and he's popping up again today to they've got some important business in hand, the 75th anniversary of the NHS, of course, but also your own latest projects, which are before us. How are you, Adam?
I'm all right. Happy birthday, NHS.
Happy birthday, NHS. Do you share, from what you know, and I mean, you come from an NHS family and a lot of your friends and colleagues are still in the service, even though you yourself are not. Do you share these warnings that we're hearing from many quarters that she may not reach her 100th birthday?
I'm afraid I do.
Really?
I can't think of the last time I spoke to a healthcare professional who was feeling upbeat about the future. So it's a slightly downcast birthday party, really.
Yes, it is. Well, I mean, obviously there are a myriad reasons, but most interesting really is the question of whether you think it's reversible.
I think it is. It just requires someone to want to reverse it and have, and put the car in the right gear. For me, the biggest crisis is one of retention of staff. And at the moment, staff are pouring out of the NHS. Last year, 160,000 people left the NHS, 20,000 up on the year before, more than have ever left. In fact, more people citing the work-life balance as a reason for leaving, more than retiring.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It's unsustainable, and something needs to change. And pay is a big part of it, but it's not all of it. You can pay someone as much as you like, but if you're doing 2-3 people's jobs and there's no sign of an end in sight, it's an impossible situation. It's
different from, I mean, you've written very powerfully and very funnily about your own departure from being a doctor, hanging up your stethoscope. It's very different what's happened, because you just felt that you were a square peg in a round hole. It just didn't suit you, and it was making you miserable. These are people who would love to carry on being doctors, but have reached a form of breaking point, I think.
It is. It's exactly that. It's morale at an all-time low. It's burnout at an all-time high. When I left the profession in 2010, I was an outlier. No one left the profession. I can't think of the last time I looked on social media and didn't see a mate, a former colleague, really? Heading off to Australia or heading off to another industry altogether. and something needs to change.
It's an extraordinary short amount of time, and you put it in those terms. Your own decision in just 13 years ago. No one needs me to remind them what changed politically in 2010, but you do see that as the sort of opening of the floodgates.
Yeah, and I think COVID obviously was another huge turning point. I think people hoped that this would be one, awful period of time, and then after that things would ease up, but it hasn't, because people are leaving, and there's all this talk about getting new people in, but there's no point running the bath harder if the plug's still out.
That's very true. I've heard it suggested that some of the people heading off to Australia are not doing so because of how they're being treated in the NHS. They're drawn to the climate and the differences. That doesn't sound very convincing to me.
There was an advert in the BMJ, the medical rag, about a month or so ago, which was pointed out to me because it had my name on it, and it said, "Got that Dr. Adam K feeling? Come to Australia." So I read it, and it paints a quite convincing picture. It said you work 10 days a month, and you're surfing for the remaining 20. They pay your accommodation, and they pay you $240,000. So if you're a junior doctor who's being told they won't even restore your pay in real terms to what I was getting 15 years ago, you're reading about the latest in psoriasis, turn over the page and see that job advert.
Yes.
It's very difficult to understand why your head wouldn't be turned.
Of course it is. And final question on this before we talk about your Edinburgh show. You mentioned the BMJ, the BMA head yesterday suggested that ministers are doing this on purpose, that there is a deliberate mission to dismantle or destroy much of the NHS. Would you agree with that?
I'm not personally a conspiracy theorist.
No.
But on the other hand, the only other answer is ineptitude.
On an almost inconceivable scale.
Yes, exactly. And also, if I was a Tory minister or a Tory MP, and I wanted to prove that this was a lie and they didn't want an alternative model, I'd make sure that I wasn't being funded by private healthcare companies and insurance companies.
It would be a start, wouldn't it? How do you get comedy out of all this? Because you're back in Edinburgh for the first time, I think, since the first book came out, or until the show that gave birth to the first book was on the road.
Yeah, it's my first month there since 2016. I mean, I think the limited success I've had is as a result of finding the comedy in it.
Yes.
I think if I advertised my show as a sort of harrowing hour of sort of non-stop gloom about the NHS, it wouldn't sell very well. So in my shows, as with my books, I trick people. I draw them in with the funny stories and the jokes, which I still very much do.
And the songs.
Yeah, a bit of music in there, just so it's not a man speaking for an hour. And
God save us from that sort of thing.
And I make sure that hopefully as people leave, they've got something to think about, and there's an awful lot to think about the NHS at the moment.
It certainly is. So you do smuggle in the serious stuff under the guise of the funny stuff. What will it be, the new show? Will it be it's called Undoctored. This is going to hurt more. So people familiar with your work, will it be a sort of a return to familiar territory but with added stories?
So it's based on a book that I've got out at the moment, also called Undoctored, which is a prequel and a sequel to This Is Going to Hurt. It looks back to medical school, which is similarly, hopefully funny, disgusting, all the rest, compared to working on the wards. Also, I look at life after medicine and what it's like to be a doctor and a patient, and also what it's like to explode your life. And a lot's happened to the NHS since I've left, and I touch on that. Plus, also, I obviously still do disgusting stories from the wards, because it'll be like, Elton doing his Glastonbury and just doing stuff from the last 2 years otherwise, wouldn't it?
I'm not going to go into any detail, but just the memory of one of the stories in your first book just caused me to cross my legs.
If you turn up to Edinburgh, I'll do that especially for you, James.
Thank you very much. Adam Kay, whose latest book, The Story of Undoctored, The Story of a Medic Who Ran Out of Patience, is out now, and who will be at the Edinburgh Festival at the Pleasance, one of the big shot venues throughout August with Undoctored, This Is Going to Hurt More. And of course, you can't expect me to clock off today without mentioning that today is the day that my publishers at Penguin have chosen to announce the imminent publication of my latest effort, the How They Broke Britain. If you follow me on Twitter at Mr. James OB, you can find all the details you need for the early dates on the national tour.
I retweeted it.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm getting a lot of jip for not having any northern venues, and it's only because I've got to be back for work the next day, but I am going to be doing northern venues. What's a nice space in Liverpool, like a medium-sized?
Oh,
kind of.
You're talking down at the Albert
or something like that.
Nice places down at the Albert Dock. Or a lovely school, maybe.
That might work.
Nice
that might
school.
work. But you can find all of those details.
My old school would have you.
Would they?
Yeah.
Is it Catholic?
Yeah.
Excellent. I get a discount then.
The nuns will look after you.
The nuns always looked after me. It is coming up to 12:58. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sheila will be with you shortly. I've said goodbye to Adam Kay a minute early by accident, so I'm in this.
Sorry, and I interrupted you early.
It's not you. I'm just doing some jazz now on the radio. I'm just kind of filling in a little bit of space before handing over to you. I could read some texts, I suppose, or some tweets. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also, I don't know if you're aware of this, rewind live radio.
Surely not.
So if you want to listen back to that Mary Black zinger that she threw at Oliver Dowden a little earlier, you could just press rewind and listen to it again to your heart's content. You'll also find all of LBC's shows there, which you can catch up on, as well as all the best video clips from LBC and other global stations. So do check it out. Rewind. A Full Disclosure is there this week. It's a nice one, lovely one actually, with Robert Rinder. Known, of course, popularly as Judge Rinder. There's also one with Adam Kay, who you just heard on the programme that we did. Did you ever get that? I get the memory of the studio that I did it in. So I was thinking it might have been during lockdown because it was in the little studio, but it wasn't during lockdown. It was with him live, but for some reason in a funny little studio. Anyway, anecdotes like that every day on LBC from 10 a.m. You can rewind live radio on Global Player. You can download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick coming up at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you right now. 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 With you right now.